Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Cryptic Corpse. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. I still taste blood in my mouth when I think about Timber Hollow. Not my blood, theirs. My name is Jack Hoskins, and I was once the best damn logger in Washington State. That was before the winter of '58, before I saw things no man should ever. See? I took the job because I needed the money. After Sarah died, I crawled inside a whiskey bottle and stayed there for months. When Jim Blackwood called offering foreman pay at a new camp called Timber Hollow, I said yes without asking questions. I should have asked questions. It's virgin forest, Jim had said, his voice crackling over the phone line. Oldest trees I've ever seen. Locals don't go near it, but that's just superstition. The camp was hidden in a valley so deep that sunlight only touched the ground for a few hours each day. 12 simple cabins, a mess hall and a radio shack, all surrounded by trees taller than any I'd ever seen. 15 men, all experienced loggers, waited for me to lead them. Morris Weber, the cook, was the oldest at 67. His hands trembled when he served stew that first night. "These trees don't want us here," he whispered when I complimented his cooking. I laughed. "Trees don't want anything, Morris." His eyes didn't smile back. "These ones do." I noticed it right away. How quiet the forest was. No birds, no squirrels, not even the sound of wind through branches. The trees seemed to swallow sound itself. On our third day, the storm hit. Not just any snow, but a white wall that blocked everything beyond your outstretched hand. The temperature dropped so fast that water froze in midair when you threw it. That's when Pete Donovan disappeared. He went to the outhouse and never came back, his bunkmate told me, shivering in the doorway of my cabin. We searched for hours, following footprints in the snow that led into the trees, then suddenly stopped. Like Pete had just vanished into thin air. He probably got lost and found shelter, I told the men. "We'll find him when the storm breaks." None of us believed it. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing things, not quite voices, but something close. I blamed it on the wind until I realized there was no wind. Just stillness and that sound, like someone whispering just below what I could understand. The next morning, I found the markings. They were carved deep into the trunks of trees, forming a rough circle around our camp. Symbols I'd never seen before. Stick figures with 2 long limbs, deer skulls with human bodies, and words in a language I couldn't read. Bill Fletcher, who'd worked with a Spokane tribe years back, stared at them with wide eyes. "It's a warning," he said quietly. "Something about a winter hunger that walks like a man." I told him he was being dramatic. Then I found the deer. It was hanging 30 feet up in a pine tree, its body twisted in a way that wasn't natural. The carcass was completely dry, no blood, like it had been drained. When I poked it with a stick, it felt hollow. Something had sucked all the bones out, leaving just the skin and meat. That night in the mess hall, as the blizzard howled outside, Morris told us a story. "My grandmother was Algonquin," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She told me about the Wendigo. It starts as a hunger in winter when food runs out. If a man eats human flesh, the Wendigo spirit enters him. First, he feels hot all the time, like he's burning up inside. Then he starts changing, growing, and the hunger never stops." The men shifted uncomfortably. "The worst part," Morris continued, "is that the person is still in there, watching as their body hunts and kills and eats, forever trapped, while the Wendigo wears their skin." Pete had been missing for 2 days when the radio died. 1 minute, it was working. The next, just static. Sometimes, if you listened closely, the static almost sounded like voices whispering names, our names. The cold got worse. The thermometer outside the mess hall broke when it hit 40 below. We huddled around the wood stoves, burning twice as much as we should have, but still couldn't get warm. That's when Hank Mills died. I was the one who found him. When he didn't show up for breakfast, I went to check his cabin. Hank was in his bed, blankets pulled up to his chin, eyes wide open and frozen solid. His face was twisted in fear, mouth open like he'd tried to scream. The window above his bed had scratches on it from the inside, like he'd tried to claw his way out of his own cabin. The men wanted to leave, but there was nowhere to go. The snow was chest deep, the trucks buried. The nearest town was 30 miles away. We would freeze to death before making it 5 miles. We stay put, I told them. Wait for help. But I knew in my gut that help wasn't coming. That night, after we buried Hank in the snow because the ground was too frozen to dig, the men started talking about their dreams. I keep seeing something following me through the trees, Ray Ellis said. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette. It calls my name, but not in its voice. It uses Jenny's voice. Jenny was Ray's wife. She died in a car crash 3 years back. Other men nodded. They'd had the same dream, something in the forest calling them, using voices they loved. On the 5th day after Pete disappeared, he came back. We were eating breakfast when the door to the mess hall swung open. There stood Pete, covered in snow, his skin grey-white with frostbite. His lips were blue, his eyes sunken. Got lost, he mumbled. Found my way back. Doc Williams tried to check him over, but Pete pushed him away. I'm fine, he snapped. Just hungry, he ate. God, did he eat. He grabbed raw bacon from the kitchen and stuffed it in his mouth. When Morris yelled at him, Pete growled, a sound no human throat should make. I watched him. Something wasn't right, despite supposedly being out in 40 below weather for 5 days. Pete kept complaining he was hot. He took off his coat, then his shirt, his skin covered in a sheen of sweat despite the cold. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I heard noises outside my cabin, sniffing like an animal, then scratching. At my door, I grabbed my axe and waited, but whatever it was went away. In the morning, I checked the snow. The tracks led from my door to Pete's cabin. They didn't look like boot prints. They were too long, with strange marks where toes should be. I decided to keep an eye on Pete. I followed him when he went to the outhouse, watched him through the mess hall window when he ate. Always alone now, tearing into his food like he was starving. One night I caught him behind the supply shed. He was hunched over something making wet sounds. When I shined my flashlight, he turned. His mouth was full of frozen fingers, human fingers. Pete, I whispered. His jaw dropped open and kept dropping, unhinging like a snake's. Inside his mouth I saw rows of teeth like needles. I ran. Behind me, I heard a sound like breaking bones and a high-pitched shriek. When the men and I returned with rifles, Pete was gone. Just a trail of strange tracks leading into the woods. The next morning, we found a circle of dead animals around the camp. Squirrels, rabbits, a fox, all turned inside out, their red insides facing the sky, placed in a perfect circle around our cabins, like a boundary or a target. The men started taking sides. Half wanted to try walking out, following the road even, in the deep snow. The other half, led by Morris, said that's exactly what it wanted, to pick us off one by one in the forest. What exactly is it, Morris? I asked him when the others had gone. His eyes were hollow when he answered. You know already, Jack. You've seen it in your dreams. And I had. A tall, skinny shape with a deer's skull for a head, watching me from between the trees. Ray Ellis was the first to break. We were playing cards in the mess hall when he suddenly stood up, his face pale. That's Jenny, he whispered. She's calling me. Before anyone could stop him, he ran outside into the dark. We yelled for him to come back, but his footsteps faded into the forest. We organized a search party at first light. All we found were his legs, severed at the knee. The wounds somehow burned closed as if by terrible cold. The fear that had been building in the camp finally boiled over. 3 men decided they couldn't wait any longer. Tom, Steve, and Mike packed what supplies they could carry and set out at dawn, following the logging road. We watched them disappear into the white. 2 days later, Tom and Steve stumbled back into camp, frost-bitten and wild-eyed. "What happened?" I asked. "Where's Mike?" Their stories didn't match. Tom said Mike had fallen into a frozen creek. Steve said Mike had stopped to rest and told them to go ahead. They couldn't even agree on which day they'd last seen him. Something was wrong with them too. They scratched at their skin constantly, leaving red marks. Both complained about being too hot despite their blue lips and fingers. Doc Williams wanted to check them for fever, but they refused to let him get close. That night at dinner, things went bad. We were eating Morris's stew when Steve started shaking. At first I thought he was having a seizure. Then I heard the sound, like wood cracking, like bones breaking. His arms stretched, growing longer, his fingers extended, the nails turning black and sharp. "Kill it!" Morris screamed. Steve, or what had been Steve, leaped across the table, moving faster than anything human could. He landed on Doug Phillips, biting into his neck. Blood sprayed across the wall. I grabbed my axe and swung. The blade sank into Steve's back, but he barely noticed. It took 4 men with axes to bring him down, and even then his body kept twitching, trying to crawl toward Doug's body. We burned both bodies behind the mess hall. The smoke was black and oily, with a smell that made us gag. "It's starting," Morris said, watching the flames. "What's starting?" I demanded, grabbing his collar. "What do you know?" He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I've seen it before. 40 years ago, another camp. I was the only one who survived. That night, while the others slept, I searched the valley on my own. I needed to understand what we were up against. About 2 miles from camp, I found a cave hidden behind a fallen tree. Inside, the walls were covered with paintings, old paintings. They showed tall, skinny creatures with deer skull heads. They showed men changing, their limbs growing, their mouths filling with teeth. And they showed a circle with 13 marks. Around it, one painting showed something worse, a creature bigger than the others, with massive antlers and dozens of human-like figures trapped inside its body, their faces frozen in screams. I ran my fingers over the images and suddenly felt eyes on me. Turning slowly, I saw it standing at the mouth of the cave. It was tall, maybe 15 feet, so skinny it looked like skin stretched over sticks. Its arms hung down past its knees, ending in long black claws. The head was a deer skull, but no deer I'd ever seen, with antlers that branched and twisted. Steam rose from its body in the cold air. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. It tilted its head, looking at me with empty eye sockets that somehow still saw. Then it spoke. "Jack." It was Sarah's voice, my dead wife's voice, perfect in every way. "Why did you let me die, Jack?" I ran. "I don't remember how I got back to camp. I just remember the sound of it following, not crashing through brush, but moving silent as smoke between trees. When I burst into the mess hall, the men were already gathered. Tom was in the corner, scratching his arms until they bled. "It needs 13, I gasped. "It needs 13 people to complete something." Morris nodded slowly. "The transformation, it starts with 1, then spreads. When it takes 13 souls, it becomes something worse, something that can leave this valley." "How do you know all this?" Bill Fletcher asked. Morris looked down. "Because I led you here, all of you. It's been inside me since the last time. Just a little piece, but enough. It whispers to me, makes me bring it food," Tom screamed then, a sound that turned into a gurgle. We watched in horror as his jaw dislocated, teeth pushing through his gums, limbs cracking as they stretched. "Get out!" I yelled, pushing men toward the door. We barely made it outside before Tom burst through the wall of the mess hall, no longer human. His skin was stretched tight over an elongated frame, his eyes black pools, mouth full of jagged teeth. We ran for the supply cabin. Inside, we barricaded the door with everything we could find. 8 of us were left. "Why didn't you warn us?" I shouted at Morris. "Why bring us here if you knew?" "It promised to let me go if I brought more. It lies. It always lies. But the hunger, you don't understand. It never stops." Outside, we could hear movement, not just one creature, but several. The transformed loggers were out there, hunting us. And behind them, something bigger, something waiting. Bill found some old maps in a drawer. "There's an old mining camp 10 miles north," he said. "If we can make it there—" "We won't," Morris interrupted. "It knows every inch of these woods. It is these woods." "Then what do we do?" I asked. Before Morris could answer, we heard a sound that chilled my blood more than any creature could. A human voice calling from outside. "Hello? Is anyone there? I'm looking for my brother." A stranger had walked right into our nightmare. "Don't answer," Morris whispered. "It's another trick." But the voice came again, closer now. "Please." I tracked my brother David's last known location to this camp. David Redfeather, one of our quiet loggers who disappeared 3 days ago. We thought he'd been taken like the others. I peered through a crack in the boards, covering the window. A man stood in the clearing, bundled against the cold. He looked Native American, with long black hair tied back. He carried a rifle and a heavy pack. "That's no Wendigo," I said. "Look how his breath makes clouds. The creatures don't breathe like we do." After much argument, we let him in. His name was Daniel Redfeather. "Where's my brother?" he asked, stomping snow from his boots. "Probably dead," Morris said bluntly. "Or worse." We told Daniel everything. Instead of disbelief, his face grew darker with each word. "My grandmother warned me," he said. "When David took this job, she begged him not to come. This valley is forbidden to our people, has been for centuries." "Why?" I asked. "Because of the winter spirit, what you call the Wendigo." Daniel opened his pack and took out a bundle wrapped in leather. "Long ago, a shaman from our tribe sought power through forbidden rituals. He performed sacrifices during the starving time of winter, eating the hearts of his victims. The spirits cursed him, transforming him into a creature of endless hunger." "Great story," Bill said. "But how does it help us now?" Daniel unwrapped the bundle, revealing what looked like a knife made from a strange yellow-brown wood. "The spirit can be harmed by fire, and by this, heartwood from the great tree that once grew in this valley before the spirit poisoned the forest." Hope flickered for the first time in days. "There's something else," Daniel continued. "The transformed ones, those newly changed, they can still be saved if the spirit controlling them is wounded badly enough." My mind raced to Pete, to the others. Could they still be in there, trapped inside monsters? We formed a plan. The fuel shed behind the mess hall held drums of gasoline for the generators and chainsaws. If we could lure the Wendigo there, maybe we could burn it. "I'll be the bait," I volunteered. It speaks to me in my wife's voice. It wants me specifically, I think." Daniel nodded grimly. "It chooses one to focus on, usually the strongest or the leader." We prepared through the night. Daniel carved symbols into bullets and shells for our guns, not to kill the Wendigo, he explained, but to slow the transformed ones. Carl Jenkins, our mechanic, rigged up makeshift flamethrowers from propane torches. Just before dawn, we put our plan into action. The remaining men, Bill, Carl, Doc Williams, and 2 others, would create a distraction on the far side of camp. Daniel would position himself near the fuel shed with his rifle. I would draw the main Wendigo out and lead it to the trap. I stepped outside into the bitter cold, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sarah," I called, my voice cracking. "I'm ready to talk now." At first, nothing, then movement between the trees, dark shapes circling. I caught glimpses of 2 long limbs, deer skull faces, the transformed loggers, my friends. Then the big one stepped out. The true Wendigo. Up close, it was worse than in the cave. Its ribs pushed against grey skin like bars in a cage. Inside the rib cage, I could see shadows moving, faces pressing against the skin from inside, mouths opening in silent screams. "Jack," Sarah's voice came from that skull head. "I've missed you." "I've missed you too," I said, taking a step backward toward the fuel shed. "Come with me, let's go somewhere we can talk." It took a step forward, then another, following me. From the other side of camp came shouts and gunfire, the diversion. The Wendigo's head snapped toward the sound, then back to me. It smiled. "God, help me?" That skull somehow smiled. "Your friends are dying, Jack," it said, still in Sarah's sweet voice. "I can save them if you come to me now." I turned and ran for the fuel shed. Behind me, I heard a sound like wind rushing through trees, but faster. The Wendigo could move like lightning when it wanted to. I burst through the fuel shed door. Daniel was waiting inside, knife ready. I'd barely made it 3 steps when the wall behind me exploded inward. The Wendigo filled the doorway, steam rising from its body as it ducked to enter. "Now!" I shouted. Daniel lunged with the wooden knife. At the same moment, Carl stepped out from behind a fuel drum, flamethrower raised. But Carl didn't fire. Instead, he smiled, a smile that stretched too wide across his face. "Carl?" I whispered. His skin was covered in a sheen of sweat despite the cold. How had we missed it? He'd been infected, hiding the signs. Carl swung the flamethrower at Daniel, catching him across the temple. Daniel went down hard. "No!" I grabbed a wrench from a workbench and charged Carl, but the Wendigo was faster. Its hand shot out, catching me by the throat, lifting me off the ground like I weighed nothing. Its touch burned with cold, sending frostbite spreading across my neck. "Look at me, Jack," it said with Sarah's voice. I refused to look at the skull face. Instead, I looked at Carl, who was backing toward the door. "Fight it, Carl," I gasped. "I know you're still in there." Something flickered in Carl's eyes. Recognition, pain. His hands trembled on the flamethrower. The Wendigo seemed to sense the shift. "He's mine now," it hissed. "They're all mine, and soon you will join us." It pulled me closer to that gaping, teeth-filled skull mouth. Cold radiated from inside it, a cold that would freeze my soul. "You know what I am?" it whispered. "I am hunger without end. I am winter that never thaws. And the best part, Jack, your consciousness stays awake while your body serves me. Forever aware, as I use your hands to kill, your mouth to feed." Its words painted a picture so horrible that something snapped inside me. With my free hand, I grabbed the wooden knife Daniel had dropped. The Wendigo saw the movement and laughed, sound like breaking ice. "Wood cannot hurt me. Only the heartwood of the great tree, which is long gone." "This is the heartwood," I managed to say. I plunged the knife into its side. The Wendigo screamed, a sound so high and terrible that the windows of the shed shattered. Its grip on my throat loosened. "Carl, now!" I shouted. This time, Carl raised the flamethrower. Something of the real man was fighting to the surface. He hesitated just a moment, then pulled the trigger. Fire erupted, engulfing the Wendigo. It thrashed and screamed, still holding me. I felt my jacket catch fire, felt heat searing my skin, but I held on, twisting the wooden knife deeper. The last thing I remember was Daniel, somehow back on his feet, grabbing me by the collar and dragging me toward the door as black smoke filled the shed. Behind us, fuel drums began to explode. I don't remember much about our escape from the burning camp. Flashes come back to me, Daniel half carrying me through deep snow, the roar of flames. Behind us, the forest lit up orange and red. Screams that didn't sound human fading into the distance. I do remember the cold, bone-deep cold that bit harder with each step we took away from Timber Hollow. The forest seemed to go on forever. My feet and hands went numb. Frostbite set in. I kept telling Daniel to leave me, but he refused. "Just a little further," he kept saying. though I think he had no idea where we were going. After 3 days of stumbling through snow-covered mountains, we saw lights. A ranger station. The ranger took one look at us and radioed for a helicopter. At the hospital, doctors said I was lucky to keep all my fingers and toes. 3rd-degree burns covered my chest and arms. Daniel was in the next bed, his head wrapped in bandages where Carl had hit him. "Did we kill it?" I asked him when we were alone. "I don't know," he said. "The fire was hot enough, but these spirits, they find ways to survive." I wanted to believe it was over. I repeated the story the rangers wanted to hear. A fire at the logging camp, men lost in the blizzard, lucky to be alive. Who would believe the truth? On my 3rd day in the hospital, I woke up sweating. The nurse said I didn't have a fever, but I felt like I was burning up inside. "It's just the trauma," the doctor told me. "Your body's still in shock," but I knew better. That night, I unwrapped the bandage on my right arm to check a persistent itch. There, pushing through the skin of my forearm, was a small antler, just a nub, like on a young deer. I stared at it for what felt like hours, touching it to make sure. It was real. I thought about cutting it off, but somehow I knew it would grow back, bigger. I pulled the bandage back over it and said nothing. But I watched the news from my hospital bed with growing horror. "Unusual cold snap hits town," the reporter said, "and police are investigating 3 disappearances in the last 24 hours. I knew then it wasn't over. It had just changed hosts. Daniel knew it too. I saw it in his eyes when he came to my room that night, a ceremonial knife in his hand, not wood this time, but steel with strange markings on the blade. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked. "The heat, the hunger." I nodded, tears rolling down my face. I can hear it whispering, telling me things, showing me what it wants me to do. Daniel sat on the edge of my bed. "My brother?" "Gone," I said. "I'm sorry. They're all gone, but they're still aware in there, still conscious. It's like their souls are trapped." Daniel's face hardened. "There's only one way to free them, to free you." I knew what he meant. I should have been scared, but instead I felt relief. "Do it," I said, "before I change, before I hurt someone." Daniel began chanting softly in his native language. He placed one hand on my forehead, the other holding the knife over my heart. "Will it hurt?" I asked, ashamed of the question even as I asked it. "Your body will feel pain," he said gently, "but your spirit will feel release." I closed my eyes and thought of Sarah. Maybe I would see her soon. The knife came down. Pain flared, sharp and hot, then quickly cold. I felt something tear loose. Inside me, not just my life, but something darker, fighting to stay. I heard Daniel gasp. When I opened my eyes, I saw why. My body was dissolving, turning to black frost that spread across the sheets, across the floor. Daniel backed away, his eyes wide. "Jack," he whispered. I tried to answer, but my mouth was gone. My consciousness was fading, but not before I saw the frost crawl up the wall, forming patterns, a message, a warning. I hope Daniel understood it. I hope he ran far from that place. The newspapers called it a tragic hospital fire. Faulty wiring. They said, 13 patients and staff died. Their bodies burned beyond recognition. Daniel Redfeather was never mentioned. I like to think he got away, that he's still out there, hunting the thing that once hunted us. 3 months after the fire, a logging company sent a survey team to Timber Hollow. The forest had regrown with impossible speed. Where our camp had stood, the trees grew in a perfect circle. The aerial photographs showed something no one on the ground could see. From above, the pattern of new growth formed a shape, a face with antlers, visible only from the sky. Last week, I saw a news item about a child in Seattle who speaks in many voices. One of them is mine. The child was found playing with a man's wedding ring, my wedding ring. Sometimes in my darker moments, I wonder if Daniel's ritual freed me at all. I wonder if I'm still in there, trapped in the hunger that walks like a man, watching through eyes that are no longer mine as it spreads. Winter is coming again. The temperature is dropping earlier than usual this year. If you're reading this and someone comes to your door on a cold night, someone whose breath doesn't fog in the air, who speaks with the voice of someone you've lost, don't let them in. No matter what they promise, no matter how much you miss that voice, don't let them in, because hunger never ends, and winter is always coming. I still hear the whispers when it rains. They rise from the drains, from puddles, from the tap when I wash my hands. Water is no longer my friend. Water is how they find you. My name is Rachel Morgan. I was a hydrologist, someone who studies water. That was my job for 15 years, until I went to Blackwater Reservoir last summer. Now I don't sleep much. I keep all my curtains closed. I haven't had a proper shower in 8 months. You might think I'm crazy. I thought so too at first. But I'm not crazy. I'm infected. And soon, you might be too. It started with dead fish, hundreds of them floating belly up along the shores of Blackwater. The water quality reports showed strange readings, things that didn't make sense to anyone at the Environmental Protection Agency. So they sent me. It's just a routine check, my boss had said. A week, maybe 2, the locals are probably dumping something they shouldn't. The drive to the Adirondacks was beautiful. That's the cruel thing about horror. It often starts with beauty. The mountains were painted in late summer greens, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how quiet. I didn't know that silence was my first warning. The Blackwater Dam stood tall and grey against the mountain backdrop. Built in the 1950s, it had turned a whole valley into a massive lake. The town of Whispering Falls now lay beneath those dark waters. Houses, schools, churches, all drowned for the sake of progress. The dam operations building was where I'd be staying. A square concrete structure with windows facing the water. My own little watchtower. Harold Finch met me at the entrance. Skinny as a rail, with hands that shook when he handed me the keys. Just temporary, I said, smiling, until I figure out what's killing your fish. Harold didn't smile back. Some things should stay dead, he muttered. I laughed, thinking he was making a joke about the fish. He wasn't laughing. That afternoon, I took my first samples from the shore. The water was cold, colder than it should have been for August, and dark. Not the normal blue-green of a mountain lake, but almost black in places. My equipment showed normal readings for most things, oxygen levels, pH, the usual suspects. But when I dropped the sonar device to map the lake bed, something strange happened. According to my readings, there was a massive empty space underneath the official bottom of the reservoir, a cave system, and an enormous one at that. That can't be right, I said to myself, checking my equipment for errors, but everything was working perfectly. Later that evening, I asked Harold about it. You know anything about caves under the reservoir? They're not on any of the geological surveys. His coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. Don't go looking for things that don't want to be found, Dr. Morgan. I noticed then that every surface in his small office had bottles of water, store-bought plastic bottles. You don't drink the tap water? I asked. Harold looked at me like I'd suggested drinking poison. 30 years I've worked at this dam. 30 years living right beside all that water. He pointed toward the massive window overlooking the reservoir. Never once have I let that water touch my lips. Why not? His eyes darted to the window. Then back to me, because it ain't just water anymore. I should have listened to him then. I should have packed my bags and left. But scientists don't run from mysteries. We chase them. That was my first mistake. The next day, I took an underwater camera out on the small research boat. The water grew darker the further I went from shore. I dropped the camera down on its cable, watching the monitor as it descended. 200 feet, 300, 400. At 500 feet, where no light should penetrate and where the pressure would crush a human body, I saw them, just for a second. Pale, elongated shapes moving through the blackness, human-like but wrong. Too thin, too fluid in their movements. I yanked the camera up so fast I nearly dropped the monitor. Equipment malfunction, I told myself. Or fish, definitely fish. But I knew it wasn't fish. And deep down, I knew it wasn't an equipment malfunction either. That night, the rain came, heavy drops that sounded like fingers tapping on my window, like something asking to be let in. I called my boss, trying to sound casual. I might need to extend my stay. There's some unusual geological features I want to check out. Whatever you need, Rachel, he said. Just figure out what's going on with that water. When I hung up, Harold was standing in my doorway. He looked older somehow, his face sagging with the weight of whatever he was about to say. You saw something out there, didn't you? He asked. I nodded slowly. Then you need to know about the Taken, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Folks who go missing near the water. Days later they come back. Look the same. Talk the same. But they ain't the same. What do you mean they're not the same? The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rushing water. I ran outside to see what was happening. The access road, the only way in or out of the dam, was underwater. A whole section had collapsed during the night's heavy rain, sending mud and rocks tumbling down the mountain. The road was gone. How long until it's fixed? I asked Harold, who stood beside me staring at the damage. A week, maybe more. He didn't seem surprised. Happens every few years, like the reservoir wants to keep people here. I called my office on the satellite phone, the only working connection now. I'm stuck here, I told my boss. Roads washed. Out. Stay safe, he said. We'll send someone to check on you when we can, but no one would be coming anytime soon. We were alone. Just me, Harold, and whatever was in that water. That afternoon, while checking the water filters, I found something that made my blood freeze. A body, wedged in the intake grate. I recognized the uniform, a state environmental inspector. His face was peaceful, like he was sleeping, but there was a small hole in the roof of his mouth, going up into his head. Something had removed his brain, not messily like an animal attack. This was precise, almost surgical. I threw up right there in the water. We need to call the police, I told Harold when I could breathe again. He just looked at me with those tired eyes. Phone's out. Satellite link too. I checked. He was right. No signal at all. This isn't happening, I whispered. That night, I dreamed I was a little girl, running through the streets of a town I'd never seen before. People called my name, not Rachel, but another name that felt right somehow. I knew every house, every tree. I waved to a shopkeeper as I passed his store. The town sign read, "Welcome to Whispering Falls." I woke up with a start. That was impossible. Whispering Falls had been underwater since the 1950s, decades before I was born. I'd never even seen pictures of it. How could I dream about it in such detail? The dreams came again the next night, and the next. Each time, I remembered more about a life in Whispering Falls, a life I couldn't possibly have lived. On my fourth day trapped at the dam, Harold fell into the reservoir. We were checking the spillway gates when he slipped on the wet concrete. I reached for him, but he was gone in a splash of black water. I ran along the edge, shouting his name, ready to jump in after him. Before I could, he surfaced near the shore ladder and pulled himself out. "Harold, are you okay?" I rushed to help him. He looked at me, blinking water from his eyes, but he didn't blink normally. It was slow, like he had to remember how to do. Yes, he said after too long a pause. "I'm fine, Dr. Morgan." He'd never called me Dr. Morgan before, always just Doc or Rachel. His movements were wrong too, jerky, like a puppet with tangled strings. And his eyes, they didn't move right. They stayed fixed, never darting around like normal eyes do. Maybe. "You should rest," I suggested, backing away slightly. No need, he said, his voice flat. I feel very well. That night I locked my door for the first time. In the morning I heard a helicopter. Help at last. I ran outside, waving my arms wildly as the small rescue chopper landed on the helicopter pad. 2 people climbed out, a man and a woman in uniform. Kevin and Tasha from the County Emergency Response Team. We came to check the road damage. Kevin explained, got reports your satellite phone went dead. Thank God you're here, I said, my voice shaking. There's been a death. And Harold, there's something wrong with Harold. Tasha frowned. Show us everything. I took them inside, but when we went to find the body in the filter grate, it was gone. Just clean metal bars with water flowing through them. It was right here, I insisted. A state inspector. His brain was missing. Kevin and Tasha exchanged looks. You've been alone up here a while, Tasha said gently. Sometimes isolation can make us see things. I'm not crazy, I snapped. And I'm not alone. Harold's here. He fell in the water yesterday and now he's different. As if on cue, Harold walked in. His movements were smoother now, almost normal, but his eyes still didn't blink enough. Hello, he said with a small smile. Coffee's ready if anyone wants some. We followed him to the small kitchen. He'd made a full pot of coffee using the tap water. I watched in horror as Kevin and Tasha accepted cups. Don't drink that, I whispered. What? Kevin looked confused. The water, I said. Don't drink anything made with reservoir water. Kevin smiled kindly. Dr. Morgan, we've all been drinking municipal water our whole lives. It's perfectly safe. Not this water, I insisted. But they didn't listen. They drank their coffee while Harold watched, that strange half-smile never leaving his face. By evening, Kevin and Tasha were arguing over nothing. Small things, like where to put their gear or whose turn it was to radio back to base. Their faces grew red with anger that seemed to come from nowhere. I watched from my doorway, clutching one of Harold's bottled waters. Something was happening to them, just like it had happened to Harold, but slower, more subtle. That night I heard scratching at my window. When I peeked through the blinds, I saw nothing, but the glass was wet, as if something had been pressing against it, something that left no reflection. In the morning, Tasha was gone. She went to check the helicopter, Kevin said, but he sounded uncertain. We found her utility belt at the bottom of the dam spillway. The metal clips and buckles were dissolved, eaten away like they'd been dipped in acid. But there was no sign of Tasha herself. Kevin's face went blank. We need to call this in. He headed for the helicopter, but stopped halfway across the yard. His body went rigid. I watched in horror as one of the things I'd seen on my underwater camera, rose up behind him. It was tall, much taller than a person should be. Its skin was nearly transparent, showing dark veins underneath. It had no hair, and its eyes were huge and black, without any white parts. Where its ears should be, there were feathery gills that moved gently in the air. The creature placed its long, webbed fingers against Kevin's head. Kevin didn't scream, he didn't fight. He just stood there as the thing's fingers sank slightly into his skull, like it was made of clay. After a long minute, the creature withdrew its hand. Kevin collapsed to the ground. The thing slid back into the reservoir without a splash. I ran to Kevin. He was breathing, but his eyes stared at nothing. He was alive but empty, like a doll with no one controlling it. I dragged him inside and locked the doors. I didn't know what else to do. Hours later, Kevin woke up, but it wasn't really Kevin anymore. We are awake, he said in a voice that echoed slightly, like multiple people speaking at once. We are hungry for more. He looked at me with eyes that knew me, not just the me I was now, but the me I had been in those dreams of Whispering Falls. You've been here before, Rachel, he said. Your memories are already ours. You just don't know it yet. I backed, away from Kevin, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. "What do you mean my memories are already yours?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Kevin's head tilted at an odd angle. "You lived here before. Your soul remembers, even if your mind does not." That was impossible. I was born in 1982. Whispering Falls had been underwater since the 1950s. "You're confused," I said. "I've never lived here." Kevin smiled, but it wasn't his smile. It was too wide, showing too many teeth. "Little Rachel Morgan, born Rachel Cooper, Red House on Elm Street. You had a yellow bike with a bell that played, 'Mary Had a Little Lamb.' You fell from the old oak by the post office and broke your arm when you were 7. A chill ran through me. The dreams, the memories of Whispering Falls, they weren't dreams at all. They were real memories, but not mine. How could he know these things? I ran from the room, locking myself in the small control center. Through the window, I could see the reservoir stretching out like a black mirror. The morning sun didn't reflect off its surface like it should. The water just swallowed the light. I needed to escape. There was an emergency boat docked at the small pier. If I could reach it, maybe I could cross the reservoir to safety. I grabbed a flashlight, Harold's keys, and all the bottled water I could carry. When I was sure Kevin wasn't nearby, I slipped out the back door and ran for the pier. The boat was small but had a motor. I untied it with shaking hands and pushed off from the shore. The motor started on the first try. I almost cried with relief. Steering toward the far shore, I pushed the throttle to full speed. The boat cut through the dark water, sending up small waves. I was going to make it. I was going to escape. Then, halfway across, the boat suddenly slowed. The motor was still running, but it was like the water had turned to thick mud. I looked over the side and gasped. The water around the boat wasn't liquid anymore. It was almost solid, like black jelly. The boat was stuck, trapped in the thickening water, and there were shapes moving beneath the surface. Dozens of them. Pale, humanoid shapes circling the boat like sharks. I yanked the motor tiller, trying to turn back, but it was no use. We were stuck. Then the motor died completely. I sat in silence, waiting for them to pull me under. But they didn't. They just watched, their black eyes occasionally breaking the surface to stare at me. After what felt like hours, the water began to thin again. The boat drifted gently back toward the dam, pushed by invisible hands beneath the surface. They were sending me back. When the boat bumped against the pier, I jumped out and ran back to the building, not looking behind me. I knew they could have taken me if they wanted to. They were toying with me. Back inside, I locked myself in the bathroom and turned on the sink to splash water on my face. What came out wasn't water. It was thick and black, with tiny things floating in it that looked like microscopic eyes. They blinked at me as the liquid swirled down the drain. I screamed and backed into the shower stall, pulling the curtain closed as if that flimsy plastic could protect me. When I caught my breath, I peeked out. Kevin stood in the doorway watching me. But not just Kevin. Harold was there too, standing unnaturally still beside him. "The waters rise," Kevin said in that layered voice. "The memories flow." "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing you have not already given us," Harold replied, his voice now matching Kevin's eerie tone. "We have tasted your mind, Rachel Cooper. We know your fears, your secrets. My name is Rachel Morgan," I whispered, but I wasn't sure anymore. Those memories of Whispering Falls felt so real now. Names change, bodies change. Memory remains, they said in unison. I pushed past them and ran to the operations center, locking the heavy metal door behind me. The room was filled with monitors showing different parts of the dam. On one, I could see Kevin and Harold walking in perfect sync toward the main gate. With trembling hands, I began searching through the old files stored in the metal cabinets. There had to be answers somewhere. Why were these things here? What did they want? In the back of a drawer, I found a folder marked Construction Anomalies Classified. Inside were yellowed photographs and reports dated 1953. The photos showed what looked like an ancient stone temple uncovered during the dam excavation. The stones were carved with images of tall, thin creatures with webbed hands. They were bowing before a much larger figure beneath the earth. A handwritten note was paper-clipped to one photo. Recommend immediate reburial and no further excavation. Local legends suggest site was sealed to contain something ancient. Workers refusing to continue. After 3 disappearances, they had built the dam anyway. They had flooded the valley, submerging not just a town, but something much older. Something that had been deliberately buried. A loud bang on the door made me jump. Then another, and another. They were trying to break in. I kept searching through the files and found a small black notebook hidden inside a technical manual. The writing inside was frantic, dated just 3 years ago. They're using us, taking our brains, our memories. They think they're saving us, preserving what would be lost when we die. They don't understand that we need our memories to be human. They're building something in the water, a network, a hive mind made of stolen human thoughts. The banging on the door grew louder. Metal. Hinges began to bend. I flipped through more pages, found their weakness. They communicate using low-frequency sounds like wails. Certain high pitches disrupt their network. I've modified some of the underwater maintenance drones to broadcast these tones, but I need to activate them manually from the lower levels. If you're reading this, I failed. Try again. Save what's left. The door burst open. Kevin and Harold stood there, but they weren't alone. Behind them were at least 10 people I'd never seen before. All had the same blank stare, the same unblinking eyes. Your knowledge will join ours, they said together. Your memories will never die. I backed away, clutching the notebook. You're stealing people's brains, their memories. Kevin's face softened into something almost like pity. Not stealing, saving. When humans die, their memories die. We keep them forever. I noticed something then. On the back wall was a maintenance panel marked Drone Control. The underwater drones mentioned in the notebook. You're not saving anyone, I said, trying to keep their attention while I inched toward the panel. You're taking people's lives, their bodies. Bodies decay, said a woman in the group. Memories are eternal. We were here before your kind, said an old man. We watched your evolution with curiosity. We learned to extract what makes you special. I reached the panel and quickly opened it. Inside was a simple control system with a keypad. You can't fight the tide, Rachel Cooper, Harold said, stepping forward. The water always wins. My fingers found the keypad. But what was the code? I didn't know. Then I remembered the notebook. The date on the first entry. I punched in the numbers, 051922. A green light flashed. Something deep in the dam began to hum. The group of possessed people suddenly clutched their heads in pain, their faces twisting in agony. What have you done? Kevin screamed, but it wasn't the layered voice anymore. It was just Kevin, sounding scared and confused. The humming grew louder. Through the windows, I could see the reservoir's surface churning as small underwater drones rose to the surface, emitting a high-pitched tone that made my teeth hurt. It's disrupting their connection, I realized aloud. The sound breaks their network. The possessed people began to fall one by one, collapsing to the floor like puppets with cut strings. Only Harold remained standing, his face contorted with rage. You think this will stop us, he hissed, his voice now deep and inhuman. We have spread beyond this lake, beyond this valley. The waters connect everything. Who are you? I demanded. What are you? Harold's face split into a terrible smile. We are the Deeplings. We were ancient when your kind still lived in caves, and we will be here long after you are gone. He lunged at me, fingers curved like claws. I dodged to the side, and he crashed into the control panel. Sparks flew as the circuits shorted out. The humming stopped. The drones went silent. Through the window, I watched in horror as the water of the reservoir began to churn and bubble as if boiling from below. Something was coming up, something big. The water parted like a curtain and something rose from the depths. Something huge. It looked almost human, but 3 times taller than a normal person. Its skin was so pale it was nearly see-through, showing dark veins and organs beneath. But its head was different. The top part was clear, like glass. And inside was a human brain floating in greenish fluid. The Queen, I whispered. More shapes surfaced around her. Dozens of deeplings crawled out of the water, their wet bodies gleaming in the emergency lights. They moved in perfect unison, like soldiers. They were carrying things, objects made from white material that I realized with horror was human bone, shaped into crude tools and weapons. "They're coming for me," I said aloud, my voice breaking. I looked around frantically. The control room had a security door that could withstand the deeplings, at least for a while. I slammed it shut just as the first of them reached the outer door of the operations center. Through the security cameras, I watched them spread throughout the building. They moved room to room, searching, looking for me. Harold stood beside the Queen, pointing toward the control room. He knew where I was. I needed a plan. The notebook had mentioned that the drones could disrupt the deeplings' communication, but the control panel was fried. There had to be another way to activate them. According to the dam schematics on the wall, there was a manual override in the lower levels, right above the water intake. I would have to go down there, into the darkness, to restart the drones. Tissy. Banging started again. Metal tools hitting the security door. It wouldn't hold forever. I searched the control room for anything I could use as a weapon. In a locker, I found a flashlight, some tools, and an old CD player with headphones. I remembered what the notebook said about high-pitched sounds disrupting their communication. An idea formed in my head. I grabbed the CD player and tools, then pried open the ventilation shaft. It was small, but I could fit. I crawled inside just as the security door began to buckle. The shaft was tight and dark. I inched forward on my elbows, trying not to make noise. Below me, I could hear the deeplings enter the control room, their webbed feet slapping wetly on the concrete floor. The ventilation shaft led down, deep into the dam structure. The further I went, the damper the air became. Water dripped from the ceiling of the shaft, soaking through my clothes. Finally, I reached a grate that looked down into the lower-level control room. Through the slats, I could see the manual override. Over the drones, a large red switch behind a glass case. I kicked the grate open and dropped down into the room. The air was thick with moisture, like breathing underwater. The walls were covered in a thin film of black slime that pulsed gently, as if alive. As I moved toward the override switch, my foot hit something soft. I pointed my flashlight down and jumped back with a gasp. A human body lay on the floor, its skull neatly opened, the brain missing. The dam worker's face was frozen in a look of surprise. He hadn't seen it coming. Fighting the urge to be sick, I stepped over the body and reached for the glass case. It was then that I noticed the dam walls. They weren't solid concrete anymore. They had been changed. The walls were lined with small, translucent sacks, each about the size of a football. Inside each sack was a tiny deepling curled up like a human baby. There were thousands of them. "They're using the dam as a nest," I whispered in horror. A sound behind me made me spin around. Harold stood in the doorway, but his body was different now. His skin hung loose, like a suit that didn't fit. Behind him stood the Queen. "You see now," Harold said, his voice a rasping whisper. "You understand what we are building." The Queen stepped forward, her movements fluid like water itself. Up close, I could see that the brain in her clear head wasn't alone. There were fragments of other brains connected to it, creating a network of neural tissue. "You're collecting brains," I said, "connecting them together." Harold nodded. Each human mind adds to the whole. We preserve what would be lost. In time, we will hold all human knowledge, all human experience. By killing people, I said. Death comes to all humans eventually. The Queen spoke, her voice resonating inside my head rather than in my ears. We give meaning to your short lives, permanence. She moved closer, her long fingers reaching for my face. I backed up against the override switch. Your memories are special, she continued. You carry echoes of this place from before. A child of Whispering Falls, born after its drowning. How is this possible? The dreams, the memories that weren't mine. I suddenly understood. My mother, I whispered. She was from here, wasn't she? She escaped before the flooding. The Queen tilted her massive head. Ah, the pregnant woman who fled. We wondered where that bloodline went. Now it returns to us, a perfect circle. Her fingers brushed my cheek, cold and wet. I felt a pressure in my head, like something trying to get in. Memories that weren't mine began flooding my mind, people I'd never met, places I'd never been. I was drowning in memories. With the last of my strength, I reached behind me and smashed the glass case with my elbow. Pain shot up my arm as glass, cut into my skin. I grabbed the red switch and pulled it down hard. Alarms blared throughout the dam. Emergency lights flashed red and blue. The Queen screamed, a sound like metal tearing. She clutched her transparent head as the high-pitched drone signal began broadcasting again. "No!" Harold shouted, his face contorting. "The hive cannot be broken!" The Queen stumbled backward, her massive body crashing into the egg-covered walls. The impact burst dozens of the sacks, spilling half-formed deeplings onto the floor. I ran past them toward the emergency stairs, clutching my bleeding arm. The whole dam was shaking now, the drone signal resonating through the concrete structure. Behind me, I heard the Queen recover her balance. "Kill her," she commanded. "Take her brain before she ruins everything." I sprinted up the stairs, the sound of slapping wet feet close behind me. The drones were working, disrupting their communication, but the Queen was still in control of her closest followers. At the top of the stairs, I burst into the main hall. Kevin and the other possessed humans lay on the floor, unconscious but alive. The deeplings from outside had retreated back to the water, confused by the loss of their hive mind. But I wasn't safe yet. Harold and 3 other deeplings emerged from the stairwell behind me, their black eyes fixed on my skull, their prize. I backed toward the control room. The CD player was still in my pocket. If the drones disrupted their communication with sound, maybe I could amplify that effect. I ducked into the control room and slammed the door shut, jamming a chair under the handle. It wouldn't hold them for long. With shaking hands, I connected the CD player to the room's intercom system, using the tools I'd found. I didn't know if it would work. I wasn't an electronics expert, but it was my only hope. The door began to splinter as the deeplings threw themselves against it. I pressed play and turned the volume to maximum. A horrible screeching noise blasted. Through the speakers, the CD was corrupted, producing nothing but harsh static and high-pitched tones. The effect was immediate. From outside, I heard the deeplings scream in pain. The banging on the door stopped. I held my breath, waiting. Silence. Carefully, I opened the door a crack. The hallway was empty. Through the windows, I could see dozens of pale bodies retreating into the reservoir, swimming away from the sound that caused them such pain. I'd won, or so I thought. A cold, wet hand clamped around my ankle. I looked down to see Harold, his body half melted into a puddle of pale flesh, but his eyes still aware, still hating. "The Queen retreats," he gasped, "but she will return. The water remembers, Rachel Cooper. The water always remembers." His hand dissolved into liquid, soaking into my skin. I felt a burning sensation spreading up my leg. Something was happening to me. Then the floor beneath me gave way with a tremendous crack. The dam was breaking. Weakened by the deepling's changes to its structure, it couldn't hold back the pressure anymore. I fell, surrounded by chunks of concrete and sprays of water. The last thing I saw before hitting the water below was the Queen diving deep into the darkness, carrying her precious cargo of stolen mines. Cold, so cold. The water closed over my head and everything went black. I woke up in sunshine. Warm hands were wrapping me in blankets. Voices shouted around me, "She's alive! Get the medic!" I blinked, trying to focus. Men and women in rescue uniforms were swarming around. Behind them, I could see the dam, or what was left of it. A huge section had collapsed, releasing a torrent of water downstream. "What happened?" a medic asked, shining a light in my eyes. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw. "The dam broke. People inside." "We found some survivors," she said. "They're confused, don't remember much. Typical with traumatic incidents." Kevin was among them, I later learned. He remembered nothing about the deeplings or what had happened to him. None of them did. Just a dam failure, a tragic accident. But I remembered everything, and as they loaded me into the helicopter, I looked back at the reservoir. The water level had dropped dramatically, revealing parts of Whispering Falls for the first time in decades, and on the newly exposed shore, small stone piles had appeared overnight, hundreds of them, each one containing a single human tooth, a message from the depths. This wasn't over. The hospital was bright and clean. Too clean. The smell of disinfectant burned my nose as nurses checked my vital signs. "Mild hypothermia and some water in your lungs," the doctor told me. "You're lucky to be alive, Dr. Morgan." I didn't feel lucky. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the Queen's transparent head with that human brain floating inside. I saw Harold's body melting into a puddle. I saw those thousands of eggs lining the dam walls. "When can I leave?" I asked. "A few days. We need to monitor you for infection. The water in that reservoir contained some unusual bacteria." I wanted to tell him it wasn't bacteria, it was something much worse. But who would believe me? A hydrologist, claiming ancient water creatures were stealing human brains? I'd sound crazy, so I nodded and pretended to rest. On my second night in the hospital, I noticed something strange. The nurses moved differently during the night shift. They walked in, perfect sync with each other, and they never blinked. From my bed, I watched them through the small window in my door. They moved up and down the hallway, checking on patients, but they weren't really checking. They were watching, waiting. In the bed across from mine, an old woman was sleeping. A nurse entered, looked at her chart, then placed a cold hand on the woman's forehead. The old woman didn't wake up. She just lay there as the nurse's fingers sank slightly into her skull, just like I'd seen the deepling do to Kevin. I had to get out of there. Moving as quietly as I could, I unplugged my monitors and slipped out of bed. My legs were weak, but fear gave me strength. I found my clothes in a cabinet and quickly dressed. The hallway was empty for the moment. I crept toward the exit sign, pressing myself against the wall whenever I heard footsteps. At the nurse's station, I paused. A large map of the county water system hung on the wall. Red lines showed the path of water from Blackwater Reservoir to nearby towns. But someone had added blue lines in marker, extending far beyond the county borders. The blue lines reached to major cities hundreds of miles away. They were tracking their spread through the water system. I made it to the parking lot and stole an ambulance. No one tried to stop me. Maybe they wanted me to lead them somewhere. Maybe they were just confident I couldn't stop what was coming. I drove straight to my office at the EPA. It was the middle of the night and the building was empty. I used my key card to enter the water testing lab and grabbed all the equipment I could carry, sensors, sample kits, and a powerful microscope. Then I headed back to Blackwater Reservoir. The dam was surrounded by caution tape and no entry signs. Half of it had collapsed in the break, but the other half still held back the remaining water. Crews had started repairing the damage, working day and night to prevent further flooding. I parked a mile away and hiked through the woods. The moon was full, lighting my path as I approached from the north side, away from the construction. The reservoir was much smaller now, with large sections of the original town visible along the shore. Broken building foundations and rusted cars dotted the muddy landscape, and everywhere those small stone piles containing teeth. There were thousands more now, forming patterns that looked almost like letters when seen from high ground. I set up my equipment on a flat rock and tested the water. Under the microscope, I could see them. Tiny spores floating in the water, each one containing a miniature version of the deepling's DNA. They were everywhere, in every drop. And according to my chemical tests, these exact same spores were showing up in water samples from cities hundreds of miles away. The failure of the dam hadn't stopped them. It had spread them further. A splashing sound made me look up. About 50 feet from shore, something broke the surface of the water. The Queen! She was back, her transparent head now housing not one brain, but several, all connected by glowing tendrils. Around her the water churned as dozens of deeplings surfaced, and behind them came people, regular humans walking out of the woods, their eyes blank, their movements synchronized. Some wore hospital uniforms, others were construction workers from the dam repair crew. They had been waiting for me. The cycle continues, the Queen's voice echoed in my head. Your resistance was impressive, but ultimately pointless. I backed away, clutching my test kit. You won't win. I'll warn everyone. I'll show them what's in the water. The Queen made a sound like laughter. They already drink us, bathe in us. We are in the rain that falls on their crops, in the pipes beneath their cities. The water flows everywhere, Rachel Cooper, and we flow with it. She was right. How do you fight something that exists in every drop of water? Something that could possess anyone who drank from a tap or walked in the rain. But then I remembered something. The dam. It wasn't completely destroyed. The main spillway controls still worked. And beneath that, the emergency purge system, designed to rapidly drain the reservoir in case of structural failure. I turned and ran toward the remaining dam structure. Behind me, I heard the possessed humans give chase, their footsteps in perfect rhythm. The control room was damaged but still accessible. I climbed over fallen concrete and twisted metal to reach the emergency controls. The panel was cracked but still had power. Outside, I could hear them getting closer. I didn't have much time. Harold had said something before he melted. The Queen retreats, but she will return. If the Queen was the heart of their hive mind, then destroying her might not kill all the deeplings, but it would cripple them. Buy humanity time to find a permanent solution. I pulled the emergency purge lever. Alarms blared throughout what remained of the dam. Far below, massive gates began to open, releasing the reservoir water in a controlled but rapid flood. The door, behind me, burst open. The Queen herself stood there, her massive body barely fitting through the doorway. Behind her were dozens of her followers, both deeplings and possessed humans. You cannot drown us, she said. We are the water. I'm not trying to drown you, I said, backing toward the shattered window overlooking the reservoir. I'm trying to trap you. I pulled out my final weapon, a small box of industrial explosives I'd found in the construction area. The detonator was already set. The Queen's black eyes widened as she understood my plan. You would die to stop us. I thought about the brain map in the hospital, the spread that had already begun. Some things are worth dying for. Her hand shot out, faster than I could react. Her fingers pierced my forehead, cold and sharp. I felt her in my mind, rifling through my memories like pages in a book. You are special, she said, almost gently. Your lineage carries echoes of Whispering Falls. Join us willingly. Your memories will live forever in our collective. For a moment I felt it, the vastness of their hive mind. Centuries of memories from thousands of humans. Knowledge that would otherwise be lost to time, preserved in their watery consciousness. It was beautiful in a terrible way. No, I whispered, fighting through the pain. Our memories make us who we are. You can't take them without destroying us. I pressed the detonator button. The world turned white, then red, then black. I don't remember the explosion. I don't remember the flood. I'm told that what remained of the dam collapsed completely, burying the Queen and her closest followers under thousands of tons of concrete and steel. But I remember what came after. I woke up floating in water, but I wasn't drowning. I didn't need to breathe anymore. Around me were others, humans and deeplings, their minds linked to mine. I could feel the Queen's presence, diminished but still there, trapped beneath the rubble, but reaching out through the water. I wasn't dead, but I wasn't fully human anymore either. The explosion had nearly killed me, and in those moments between life and death, the deeplings had changed me, preserved me, made me part of them. For months, I drifted through the underwater remains of Whispering Falls. I learned the truth. The deeplings weren't evil, not exactly. They were ancient, with a completely different understanding of life and death. They thought they were saving us from the tragedy of lost memories, lost knowledge. They couldn't understand that taking our memories changed who we were. Slowly, I learned to separate my consciousness from theirs, to be in the water but still be myself, and eventually to find a human host, someone swimming in a lake or standing in the rain, and briefly share their body to warn others. That's what I'm doing now, using borrowed hands to write this story, trying to warn you, because the Queen is recovering. The hive mind is rebuilding, and the water is everywhere. Look at the reservoirs on satellite maps. See how they're changing shape, connecting in patterns like a giant neural network. That's them, growing, learning, spreading. So check your water. Look for the black specks that might be tiny eyes. Listen for whispers in the rain. And if you start having memories of places you've never been, people you've never met, get away. In from the water. Any water, as fast as you can, because I'm still here, trapped between worlds, and I've seen what's coming when the Queen fully heals. The deeplings believe they're saving humanity, one brain at a time, but some things should stay, forgotten. Some depths should remain undrowned, and some waters should never be touched. I still hear them sometimes, that low rumble that vibrates in your chest before it reaches your ears, the sound that means they're watching. My name is Nora Wilson. I was a wildlife photographer, the kind who crawls through mud for 12 hours to get the perfect shot of a snow leopard, or waits in a blind for days to capture a rare bird. My photos have been in National Geographic, BBC Wildlife, everywhere. People called me fearless. That was before the Olympic Peninsula. Before I learned what it really means to be hunted, it started with rumors, local hikers disappearing, park rangers finding empty tents with all the gear still inside, strange structures deep in the forest that nobody would claim responsibility for building, and whispers about something large moving through the trees at night. Another Bigfoot story, my editor said when I pitched the trip, but fine, the scenery alone will be worth it. So I packed my Jeep with camping gear, 6 cameras, satellite phone, food for 2 weeks, and drove to Washington State. The Olympics. National Forest is ancient. Massive trees older than America itself, creating a canopy so thick that permanent twilight reigns on the forest floor. Beautiful, in a way that makes you feel small. I met Joseph Running Bear at the edge of the forest. He was a local guide, about 50, with deep creases around his eyes and hands that never seemed to stop moving. The place you want, he said when I showed him the coordinates, is marked incomplete on forestry maps, equipment malfunction zone. That's exactly why I'm going, I said. If something's interfering with equipment, it might be what I'm looking for. Joseph's eyes narrowed. People call it the Night Territory. We don't go there unless we have to. I've heard similar warnings before every expedition. Locals always have stories. I smiled and offered him triple his usual rate. The first few days were uneventful. I set up camera traps, hoping to capture whatever was roaming these woods. The silence was what struck me most. No birds, hardly any insects, just the occasional rustle of wind through towering trees. On the fourth day, I found the first structure, a massive dome of branches woven so tightly together it looked watertight. Too complex to be natural, no storm could arrange branches with such precision, and too large to be made by humans. The ceiling inside stood easily 15 feet high. What do you think? I asked Joseph, who'd been unusually quiet that day. I think we should go back, he said simply. That night, my first camera trap triggered. I rushed to retrieve the memory card, excited to see what animal had wandered by. But when I plugged it into my laptop, the screen showed only static. Same with the second and the third, except there was a pattern to the static. The cameras facing north and west worked perfectly. The ones facing east, toward the deepest part of the forest, showed nothing but digital snow. That's when Joseph finally told me about the Night People. My tribe has known about them for thousands of years, he said, staring into our campfire. They were here before us, taller than men, covered in hair, but walking upright. Some stories say they can speak through thoughts. Others say they can make you see things that aren't there. I'd heard Sasquatch legends before, but something in Joseph's voice made me shiver. They're intelligent? I asked. Joseph nodded slowly. More than intelligent, they understand things we don't. The old ones say they know how to bend light around their bodies, how to send sounds that change how you think. His eyes met mine across the fire. They allow us to live here, because so far, we haven't become a threat. I laughed nervously. And what would make us a threat? Finding them, he said, proving they exist. The next morning, I found massive footprints near our camp, 20 inches long, with strange ridge patterns unlike anything I'd seen in any primate. Beside them were symbols drawn in the dirt. Not random marks, but deliberate, complex patterns that repeated themselves. I tried calling my editor to describe what I'd found, but my satellite phone only produced a high-pitched whine that made my teeth hurt. When I returned to camp, Joseph was kneeling beside my SUV, looking pale. Someone's been here, he said. The hood was open. Inside, the engine components, spark plugs, filters, connectors, had been carefully removed, cleaned and arranged by size in neat rows on a nearby rock. Nothing was broken. Nothing was missing. It was as if something had simply wanted to understand. How it worked, I felt the first real twinge of fear then. Not the excited nervousness of tracking a predator, but genuine fear. We were 3 days' hike from the nearest ranger station, with no way to call for help and no vehicle. Someone, something, was watching us, and it was getting curious. That night I couldn't sleep. Every crack of a twig made me sit up in my tent. Every whisper of wind sounded like breathing. I kept thinking about the engine parts laid out so neatly. Whatever did that wasn't just an animal. Animals don't organize things. Morning came after what felt like forever. I stepped outside and nearly tripped over Joseph, who was sitting cross-legged, staring at the trees. "We need to leave," I said. "We can hike back to the ranger station." Joseph didn't look at me. I hear them talking. A chill ran through me. Who? The Night People. They're deciding what to do with us. He pressed his palms against his ears. "I can't make it stop." I touched his shoulder, and he jumped like I'd shocked him. His eyes were bloodshot, pupils huge. "Come on," I said. "Pack your things, we're going." But Joseph shook his head. "I need to think." Then he walked into the forest, ignoring me when I called after him. I waited all day, but he didn't come back. As the light faded, I realized I was alone. That's when I remembered Max, another photographer who was supposed to meet us yesterday. He hadn't shown up, and with everything else happening, I'd forgotten all about him. I grabbed my flashlight and hiking pack. Max's last text had said he was camping near Twin Falls, about 2 miles east. If I could find him, at least I wouldn't be alone. The forest was unnaturally quiet as I hiked. No crickets, no owls, just the soft crunch of my boots on pine needles. My flashlight beam bounced between the massive tree trunks, creating more shadows than light. I almost missed Max's campsite. No fire, no tent, just a sleeping bag spread open on the ground. I called his name, but only echoes answered. Then I looked up. Max was hanging from a branch about 20 feet up. Not by his neck, by his belt and backpack straps, like someone had carefully placed him there. His arms dangled at weird angles. I dropped to my knees and threw up. When I could finally stand again, I forced myself to look more carefully. There was no blood, no signs of animals. At Max's feet was a pile of camera equipment taken apart just like my car engine, each piece clean and arranged by size. But his camera was missing. I found it in his hands, which were folded neatly on. His chest. No, not in his hands. Where his right eye should have been, the camera lens was somehow inserted, like a grotesque extra eye. I ran. I didn't care which direction. I just ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. When I finally stopped, I had no idea where I was, lost in a forest where something was hunting us. That night, I climbed a tree and tied myself to the trunk with my belt. I didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Max with that lens in his head. Morning light brought little comfort. I needed to find my way back to camp to get my supplies. Using the sun to orient myself, I started walking. West, that's when I first felt it. A deep, rumbling sound that I felt more than heard. It made my teeth vibrate and my stomach turn, like the bass at a concert, but lower and coming from somewhere ahead of me. Every step I took toward it made the feeling worse. Anxiety bubbled up in my chest. My vision blurred at the edges. When I turned around, the feeling stopped. It happened again an hour later, but from a different direction. I was being herded, I realized, kept away from certain parts of the forest. By some miracle, I found my camp again. Everything was how I'd left it, except my laptop was open and on, the screen showing a black background with a single blinking cursor. I didn't turn it on. I gathered food, water, my emergency flare gun, and a knife. As I worked, I felt eyes on me from every direction. The silence pressed in like a physical weight. That's when I saw it. About 50 yards away, partly hidden behind a massive fallen log, was a face. Not human. The forehead sloped back sharply, and dark hair covered everything but the eyes and flat nose. Those eyes, deep set and dark, watched me with unmistakable intelligence. I slowly reached for my camera, but the moment I moved, the thing's head tilted. It was about the size of a child, maybe 4 feet tall. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaking. It stood then, not a child, just crouching. Now standing, it was at least 6 feet tall, with long arms that hung below its knees. Its body was covered in dark, reddish-brown hair. We stared at each other for what felt like minutes. Then its mouth opened, and that rumbling sound hit me like a wave. My muscles locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even blink as the creature turned and disappeared into the trees with shocking speed. When I could move again, I found my camp surrounded by hundreds of small stone towers. Each one was different. Some twisted like DNA helixes, others arranged in perfect geometric patterns. They looked like equations or maps written in stone. That night I set up my longest telephoto lens and watched the edge of the clearing. Hours passed. Just as my eyelids were growing heavy, movement caught my eye. Through the lens I saw them clearly for the first time. A family, 3 adults and what looked like a teenager. 9 feet tall, walking upright, their bodies covered in thick hair. But it was their faces that struck me most, expressive, with deep-set eyes that reflected my flashlight back with a green glow. They were signing to each other, not random movements, but a complex language of gestures. One pointed to my tent, another shook its head. They were deciding something. I took photo after photo, my hands trembling so badly I worried they'd all be blurry. The largest one suddenly turned and stared directly at me, as if it could feel the camera lens focusing on it. Then they melted back into the darkness, moving silently despite their size. That night, I dreamed I was running through the forest on all fours. I could see, in the dark, picking up ultraviolet markings on trees and rocks. I could smell humans from miles away, their sweat, their food, their fear, and in the dream I hated them, hated their noise, their machines, the way they cut into the earth and never stopped taking. I woke up gasping for air, the hatred still, burning in my chest like it was my own. On the 8th day, a man's voice woke me. "Hello? Anyone here?" I grabbed my knife and peeked out of the tent. A forest ranger in a green uniform was standing by my cold fire pit, looking around. "Oh, thank God," I said, stumbling out. "I need help." His name was Patrick Donovan, broad shoulders, red beard, kind eyes. He'd been sent to find Max after he missed 3 check-ins with his editor. "I found him," I said, my voice cracking. "He's dead." Patrick's face darkened. "Show me." I described where I'd found Max's body. Patrick pulled out his radio, but when he tried to call it in, all we got was static. "Weird," he said, tapping the radio against his palm. "This is military grade, works everywhere." "Nothing electronic works right here," I said, "and there's something else you need to know." I told him everything, the footprints, the stone arrangements, the creatures I'd photographed. I showed him my camera scrolling through the photos I'd taken, but the photos showed nothing, just empty forest. Even the ones I was certain had captured the Sasquatch family were blank, or showed strange light distortions, like heat waves on a hot road. Patrick looked at me with pity. "You've been alone out here a while. The mind plays tricks." "I'm not crazy," I snapped, "and I'm not alone. There's my guide, Joseph. He's missing too." Patrick sighed. "Look, we need to find your friend's body and get you out of here. You're obviously exhausted." I wanted to argue more, but what could I say? My evidence had vanished. We set up camp side by side that night. Patrick insisted on starting a fire, despite my warnings. "Animals fear fire," he said confidently. "These aren't animals," I whispered, but he didn't hear me. In the middle of the night, I jerked awake to a sound I couldn't place, a sort of wet, rhythmic noise. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. I slipped out of my tent. The fire had burned to embers, casting just enough light to see Patrick's tent was open, empty. Following the sound, I walked toward a fallen log about 20 yards from our camp. There was Patrick sitting cross-legged, very still. "Patrick," I whispered. He didn't respond. As I got closer, I realized the noise was coming from him, from his head. In the dim moonlight, I could see something shiny and wet on his scalp. He was cutting himself, small, precise movements with what looked like a shard of stone. "Patrick!" I screamed, rushing forward. His eyes were open but empty. He didn't blink, didn't react as I grabbed his wrist to stop him. The stone fell from his limp fingers. In the light of my flashlight, I could see he'd cut a perfect circle on the top of his head, the skin peeled back to reveal his skull. There was almost no blood, like his body had forgotten how to bleed. Dragged him back to camp, wrapped his head in a clean t-shirt and tried to wake him. His pulse was steady, his breathing normal, but his eyes stared at nothing, and he wouldn't respond to my voice or even to pain when I pinched him. He died just after sunrise. One moment breathing, the next not. No struggle, no change in his blank expression. His brain activity just stopped. I buried him as best I could and marked the grave with rocks. Then I packed everything I could carry and started walking. I didn't care if I was lost. I had to get out. The forest seemed to shift around me. Trails that should have led downhill doubled back. Landmarks I'd pass, then pass again an hour later. By sunset, I realized I'd been walking in circles despite using my compass. When I finally collapsed from exhaustion, I noticed something on my camera equipment. A fine, hair-like fungus growing in the crevices. I tried to wipe it off, but it clung stubbornly. Looking closer, I saw the same growth on my skin, concentrated around my ears and temples. It didn't hurt or itch. It was just there. That night, Joseph returned. I was dozing against a tree when his voice startled me awake. "Nora," he said calmly, stepping into my little camp. "I've been looking for you." He looked exactly the same clothes, same weathered face. But something in his eyes had changed. They were darker, more focused. "Where have you been?" I demanded. "Patrick is dead. Max is dead. We need to get out of here." Joseph sat across from me, his movements fluid and relaxed. "I've been with them, learning." My mouth went dry. "With who?" "The people. The true people." He smiled, and it wasn't his smile. "They've been here for 15,000 years, Nora. Before our cities, before our countries. They developed differently than we did." "What are they?" I whispered. "They call themselves the Klahowya. They're what we might have become if we'd taken a different path." Joseph leaned forward. "They developed mental abilities instead of technology. They can produce sounds we can't hear that affect the brain. They can make you see things that aren't there, or not see things that are." My hand crept toward my knife. "Are you one of them now?" Joseph laughed. "No, I'm still human, just connected. They've studied our brains for centuries. They know exactly which frequencies disrupt which emotions, which chemicals trigger, which responses. Why are they killing people?" Joseph's face hardened. "They're studying us, like we study animals. They need to understand how our brains work if they're going to survive us." "Survive us," I repeated. "Humans are expanding everywhere, cutting down their forests. They need to know their enemy." His eyes bored into mine. "That's why I brought you here, because of your photos. They want to understand how we document things." A cold realization washed over me. "You led us here on purpose." Joseph nodded. "I've brought many people over the years. Researchers, hikers, brain donors, the elders call them." I gripped my knife tighter. "And what am I?" "You're different. They're interested in you. They want to know if you can be translated." He tilted his head. "Some humans can learn to hear them, to see as they see." Like Patrick. Cutting open his own head, Joseph winced. "That was unfortunate. Some minds can't handle the connection. They try to physically make room for the new thoughts." I stood up, knife out now. "I'm leaving tomorrow. I'm finding a way out." Joseph didn't move. "There is no way out unless they allow it. The forest is their tool, Nora. They can make you walk in circles forever." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not with Joseph nearby, watching me with those changed eyes. I waited until his breathing deepened, then slipped away into the darkness. As I crept through the forest, I heard a rustling overhead. Looking up, I saw a small, slim figure moving through the branches with incredible agility, the young Sasquatch from before. It stopped directly above me, hanging from one impossibly long arm. In the moonlight filtering through the leaves, I could see it was female with a softer face than the others. She tilted her head, studying me with unmistakable curiosity. Then she dropped something. It landed at my feet with a soft thud. Max's camera. I picked it up with trembling hands. The screen was shattered, but when I turned it on, it worked. Scrolling through the photos, I saw dozens of clear images of the Sasquatch. In some, they were looking directly at the camera. In others, they were performing what looked like experiments, mixing things in stone bowls, and in the last photos, they were looking directly at Max's previous hiding spots from days earlier. They'd known where he was the whole time. They'd been watching him, watching them. When I looked up again, the young Sasquatch was gone, but now I had proof. And suddenly, I understood why Joseph had warned me. Finding them wasn't just about discovery. It was about becoming the discovered. I spent that night studying Max's camera with its incredible photos while hiding in a hollow log. If the Sasquatch could affect electronics, why had they allowed these photos to remain intact? Was it a message, a warning? By morning, dark clouds had gathered overhead. The air felt heavy with coming rain, and something else, a tension, like the forest itself, was holding its breath. I needed a plan. I couldn't outrun them, couldn't hide from them, but maybe I could block them. Remembering how their sounds affected my mind, I tore apart my headphones and used the padding, duct tape from my repair kit, and aluminum foil from my food supplies to make a crude helmet. If they used sound to control us, maybe I could block enough of it to think clearly. I put it on just as thunder rumbled overhead. With the helmet, the world sounded muffled, distant, but my head felt clearer already. I needed to find the edge of their territory. Joseph had said they wouldn't follow past a certain point, but which direction? I studied my map, looking for the nearest road or ranger station. The storm hit just as I set out. Rain poured through the canopy, turning the forest floor into mud. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the massive trees. I'd been walking for perhaps an hour when I heard it, a low rhythmic thumping coming from all around me. Not thunder, drumming, dozens of heavy objects hitting trees in perfect sync. They were coming. I picked up my pace, splashing through puddles, my boots sinking in mud. The drumming grew louder, closer. Then I saw them. Through the rain, dark shapes moving between trees, too tall, too fluid in their movements to be human. Their fur was matted with rain, making them look even more primeval. I ran. Behind me, the drumming changed, becoming faster, more urgent. With each beat, a wave of fear washed over me, despite my makeshift helmet. My chest tightened, my vision narrowed. Every instinct screamed at me to curl up and hide. I kept running. A clearing appeared ahead. In the center stood the largest structure I'd seen yet, a massive dome of woven branches at least 30 feet high. Around it, smaller structures formed a village of sorts. I skidded to a stop. I'd run straight into their home. Dozens of Sasquatch surrounded the clearing, some emerging from the structures, others from the forest, all staring at me with those intelligent, deep-set eyes. And among them stood Joseph, his expression serene. "You shouldn't have run," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "They don't like that." The circle parted, and a new figure approached. Taller than the others by at least 3 feet, its head was disproportionately large, with a domed forehead that extended backward. Its fur was grey rather than brown, and its eyes were almost human but larger, with a golden ring around the pupil. The Elder. As it approached, a pressure built in my head that even my helmet couldn't block. Images flashed in my mind. Cities burning, forests growing over concrete ruins, humans kept in cages. I fell to my knees, gripping my head. "Stop it!" The Elder stopped a few feet away, studying me like I was an interesting insect. Then it made a series of clicks and whistles that seemed to resonate in my chest. Joseph translated. "The Elder asks why you hide your mind from them." I tore off my helmet. "Because you're in it." Rain plastered my hair to my face as I glared at the creatures surrounding me. "What do you want from me?" The Elder made more sounds, and Joseph nodded. "They want to know if you can be made to understand, if your kind can learn before it's too late." "Learn what?" "That you're destroying everything," Joseph said, his voice sad. "That your cities and machines are killing the old forests where they live. That soon they'll have to fight back." Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the entire circle of creatures. In that moment, I noticed something. a smaller figure partially hidden behind the elder, the young female who had given me Max's camera. She was watching me intensely, her head slightly tilted. When our eyes met, she blinked slowly, deliberately. The elder noticed our exchange and made a sharp sound. Two larger Sasquatch grabbed the young female, pulling her back. Then the elder pointed at me and made a sweeping motion with its long arm. "They're taking you to the council," Joseph explained, "to decide." 4 Sasquatch approached me. I scrambled backward, but there was nowhere to run. They lifted me easily, their hands surprisingly gentle despite their size, and carried me toward the largest structure. Inside, the dome was lined with soft moss that glowed with a faint bioluminescence, casting everything in eerie blue light. The rain drummed on the woven roof, but not a drop came through. They set me down in the center of a circle of seated elders, 7 of them, all with the same enlarged craniums and grey fur. Joseph followed, sitting cross-legged beside me. "What happens now?" I whispered. "They share memories," he said. "It's how they decide things. They're going to show you what they know about humans." Before I could ask more, the elders began humming, a sound so deep it made my bones vibrate. The blue moss brightened, and suddenly I wasn't in the dome anymore. I was flying high above the Olympic Peninsula, watching as the forest was slowly eaten away by logging over decades. I felt the pain of each tree falling as if it were my own limb being severed. The scene changed. I was cowering in a cave as humans with guns hunted through the forest, shooting at shadows, killing one of the young Sasquatch who wasn't quick enough to hide. Another shift. I felt the burning of acid rain on my skin, saw fish dying in streams poisoned by chemicals from nearby factories. Image after image flooded my mind. The destruction humans had caused, seen through the eyes of creatures who had lived in harmony with the forest for thousands of years. When it finally stopped, I was curled in a ball on the moss floor, sobbing. The memories weren't just pictures, they carried all the emotions with them, the grief, the rage, the fear. "Now you understand," Joseph said quietly. "They're not monsters, Nora. They're survivors, and they're deciding whether humans can be allowed to continue as we are." I wiped my eyes, sitting up shakily. "And if they decide we can't?" Joseph didn't answer, but his expression told me everything. The Sasquatch had been patient, hiding, watching, but that patience was running out. The elders conferred among themselves, making those clicking sounds that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly in my skull. Finally, the largest elder pointed at me and made a series of gestures. "They want to keep you," Joseph translated, "for study, to understand how human minds work, so they can better predict what your kind will do next." My mind raced. I had to escape, had to warn someone. But how? Then I remembered something. The food in my pack. My trail mix, beef jerky, energy bars, all loaded with preservatives. Joseph had said they couldn't tolerate certain chemicals in processed foods. "I need to get something from my pack," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. A gesture of friendship," Joseph translated, and after some discussion, one of the Sasquatch brought my backpack. With shaking hands, I rummaged through it, pulling out food packets. "Tell them these are gifts," I said to Joseph, "our special food." As he translated, I crumbled energy bars and trail mix in my hands, scattering the pieces around me in a circle. Some of the younger Sasquatch leaned forward, sniffing curiously. The young female who had helped me suddenly pushed forward, making urgent sounds and pointing at the food. She understood what I was doing. Chaos erupted. The elders rose to their feet, making sharp warning sounds, but several younger Sasquatch had already grabbed pieces of the food, sniffing and tasting. Within seconds, they began to stumble, their movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. The humming that had filled the dome faltered as the elders rushed to help the affected ones. In the confusion, the young female grabbed my arm, pulling me toward a small opening in the back of the dome. We slipped through into the pouring rain. She led me through the village, staying in shadows, moving with surprising speed despite her size. Behind us I could hear angry howls rising above the storm. We ran until my lungs burned. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, taking turns and paths I would never have noticed on my own. Finally, she stopped at the edge of a swift-moving river, swollen with rain. She pointed across it, then at me, her intention clear. This was as far as she would go. "Thank you," I gasped, still catching my breath. She tilted her head, then reached out one long finger and touched my temple gently. A single image flashed in my mind, a map showing the river flowing toward a road about 2 miles downstream. Then she was gone, melting into the forest like a shadow. I waded into the cold river, letting the current carry me toward freedom. Don't remember much of that journey downstream. The water was numbingly cold, the current strong enough to bounce me off rocks and fallen logs. But I didn't dare leave the river. The water would hide my scent, make me harder to track. At some point, I dragged myself onto a muddy bank, shivering uncontrollably. Dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the trees. I stumbled forward, following the sound of rushing water. 2 hours later, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world: car engines. The highway. A trucker found me wandering along the road's shoulder, soaking wet and babbling about creatures in the forest. He called an ambulance, and the next thing I knew, I was in a rural hospital with an IV in my arm and a police officer asking questions I couldn't answer. "Ms. Wilson," the doctor said gently after the officer left, "you were suffering from severe dehydration and exposure. We also found high levels of psilocybin in your system." "Silo? What?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Magic mushrooms. A hallucinogenic. Very common in these forests." She patted my hand. "Whatever you think you saw out there, it wasn't real." I wanted to argue, to tell her about Max and Patrick, about Joseph's betrayal and the Sasquatch village, but the words wouldn't come. My thoughts felt jumbled, distant. They kept me for 3 days. The police searched for Max and Patrick but found nothing. No bodies, no camera traps. Even my campsite seemed to have vanished. Joseph was known to the local police. "Bit of a character," they said. "Likes to scare tourists with his stories." But they couldn't find him either. I insisted they check my cameras, certain the photos would prove I wasn't crazy. But when we looked, the memory cards showed nothing unusual, just empty forest scenes. A few blurry animals too small to be what I'd seen. Even Max's camera, which I'd managed to keep with me, showed nothing but pictures of trees and landscapes. The world thought I was a hiker who got lost, ate some bad mushrooms, and had vivid hallucinations. My editor was just glad I was alive. Though disappointed I hadn't gotten the Bigfoot scoop I'd promised. After a week in a motel recovering, I flew back to Chicago. I tried to return to normal life, to forget what had happened. But I couldn't. For one thing, my hearing had changed. Sounds weren't just sounds anymore. They had colors and textures. A car horn would flash yellow in my vision. A barking dog would leave purple ripples in the air. Music was almost unbearable, a kaleidoscope of colors and patterns that overwhelmed my senses. And I kept finding those fine, hair-like growths on my skin. I'd scrub them away in the shower, but they'd always return, especially around my ears. 2 weeks after returning home, I was sorting through my gear when a small, hard lump behind my right ear caught my attention. Using 2 mirrors, I examined it. A tiny bump under the skin, like a pea. I pressed it, and a sharp pain shot through my head, followed by a flash of images that weren't mine. Dense forest, stone tools, a night sky filled with more stars than I'd ever seen. The Sasquatch's memories. With trembling hands, I felt behind my left ear and found another bump, just like the ones I'd seen Joseph touching when he translated for the Sasquatch. They had tagged me, like a research animal released, back into the wild. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak in my apartment made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. I kept expecting to see that massive elder Sasquatch standing in my bedroom doorway. Instead, I got something worse. The news. "Breaking news tonight," the TV anchor said. "Park rangers in Olympic National Forest are investigating the mysterious disappearance of a research team. This marks the 5th disappearance in Pacific Northwest forests this month." The screen showed a map with red dots marking disappearances across Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. The pattern was expanding. I booked a flight back to Washington the next morning. I don't know what I thought I could do. Warn people? Find proof. Maybe I just needed to know I wasn't crazy. This time, I stayed in a small motel on the edge of the forest and spent my days interviewing locals. Most laughed at my questions about Bigfoot, but a few, mostly older Native Americans, nodded knowingly. "The night people are moving," an elderly woman told me as she sorted dried herbs in her kitchen. "They don't like what's happening to their home." I showed her the lumps behind my ears. She didn't seem surprised. "They've marked you," she said simply. "They can see through your eyes now, hear through your ears." "Can I remove them?" I asked desperately. She shook her head. "They grow into your brain now, like roots." That night, lying in my motel bed, I felt a presence in the room. I knew before I even opened my eyes who it would be. The elder stood beside my bed, its massive frame somehow fitting in the small room. In the dim light from the parking lot outside, its eyes glowed with that golden ring around the pupil. I should have been terrified. Instead, I just felt tired. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. Didn't speak. Instead, images flooded my mind. Me standing before a logging company board, me leading journalists into the forest, me working with the Sasquatch to save their home. They wanted a translator, someone who could speak for them to the human world. "And if I refuse?" I asked. More. Images, the young female Sasquatch who had helped me, dead, Patrick cutting into his own skull, Max hanging from that tree. The message was clear: cooperate or more would die. "If I help you," I said carefully, "you have to promise to stop killing people." The elder tilted its head, considering. Then it nodded. "Once I made my decision then, not just for myself, but for everyone who might wander into those woods." The next day, I sent a package to my editor, a thumb drive with all my notes, and a letter explaining that I was taking an extended leave to work on an environmental project. I didn't say where. Then I went back into the forest. Joseph was waiting at the trailhead, smiling his new, not quite right smile. "They said you'd come back," he said. "They can be very persuasive." "I'm not doing this for them," I replied. "I'm doing it for everyone they might hurt if I don't." The process wasn't what I expected. No surgery, no physical changes, just days spent in the moss-lined dome, breathing in spores from special fungi, drinking bitter teas, and listening to the elders humming until the implants in my head grew deeper, formed more connections. Day by day, I could understand more of their clicking language. I could see the ultraviolet markings they left on trees. I could feel the vibrations of the earth that told them when humans were approaching. I lost parts of myself in the process. My memories of childhood grew dimmer. My human emotions became muted, distant things, but I gained something too, a connection to creatures who had watched our civilization rise, who had technologies we'd never imagined, who could teach us how to live with the earth instead of against. 1 year later, a major logging operation planned for the Olympic Peninsula was mysteriously cancelled. The CEO told reporters he'd had a change of heart after vivid dreams about environmental destruction. He wasn't the only one. Across the country, people in positions of power reported similar experiences. Nightmares so real, they changed lifelong policies overnight. The young female Sasquatch, I call her Maya now, has become my closest companion. She's teaching me, How they bend sound waves, how they use fungi to communicate with trees, how they can project thoughts across miles. And I'm teaching her about humans, about our fears, our hopes, our capacity for both destruction and compassion. Sometimes when I look at old photos of myself, smiling, normal, human, I wonder if I made the right choice. If becoming a bridge between species was worth the pieces of humanity I've lost, then I think about the alternative, about the war that was coming, about what creatures with their abilities could do to our vulnerable human minds if they decided to fight back. There are others like me now. I can sense them. Men and women across the country with implants behind their ears, working as environmental consultants near forests where the Sasquatch have established colonies. Translators, ambassadors, hostages, we're all of these things. Last week I developed the last photos from my time in the forest. The ones I was sure showed nothing. But now, with my changed eyes, I can see them clearly. Sasquatch standing in plain sight in what looked like empty forest. Dozens of them, perfectly camouflaged, watching from the trees. And not just in the Olympic Peninsula. They were in photos I'd taken years earlier in Yosemite. In the Smokies, in forests across America. They've been there all along, watching, waiting, growing stronger. I don't know what the future holds for either species, but I do know this. We are not alone in our forests. We never were. And we're running out of time to learn how to share this world. Sometimes at night, I go outside and look up at the stars. If I focus just right, I can see the geometric patterns the Sasquatch elders showed me, constellations marking territories that stretch across continents, visible only to those who know how to look. The night territory is spreading, and if you're walking in a forest and feel that low rumble in your chest, that pressure behind your eyes, turn back. They're watching. They're always watching, and not all of them made the same promise to spare you that they made to me. The water wasn't supposed to move that way. I've studied ocean currents for 15 years, but I'd never seen anything like this. The waves circled my research station like sharks, moving against the wind, against nature itself. That was my first clue that something was hunting me. My name is Marianne Everett. I'm a marine biologist, and I came to this lonely barrier island off the Louisiana coast to study red tide. Now I'm fighting to survive what lives in these waters. I arrived 3 weeks ago. The Stilthouse Laboratory sits on wooden legs above the marshland, with the angry Gulf of Mexico stretching to the horizon on the other side. The locals call this place nowhere because that's what's around it. Just water, reeds, and sky. The mainland is an hour away by boat, and there's no cell service. Just an old radio and a satellite phone for emergencies. I loved the isolation at first. Just me and my research, away from department politics and funding battles. The Stilthouse creaked in the wind, like an old friend talking to me. During those first peaceful days, I'd sit on the deck watching pelicans dive for fish, filling my journal with observations about water samples and algae growth. Then the weather reports started warning about Hurricane Eliza. "You need to evacuate, Dr. Everett," the Coast Guard officer told me over the radio. "We're clearing everyone within 50 miles of the coastline." I looked at my equipment, my samples, my data. A hurricane would churn up deep water phenomena. I might never have another chance to study. "I'm staying," I said. "The Stilthouse has survived dozens of hurricanes. I've got emergency supplies, and the upper level is 30 feet above the storm surge line," the officer argued, but I was stubborn. "Finally," he sighed, "your funeral, lady? Last boat's leaving the mainland dock in 3 hours if you change your mind." I didn't. That night, as the barometric pressure dropped and the sky turned the sickly yellow-green that precedes a major storm, I noticed something strange in the water. Glowing blue patterns swirled beneath the surface, bioluminescent organisms, but moving with purpose, not drifting with the currents. They formed circles around the stilt house's supports, pulsing brighter whenever I moved in front of the windows, almost like they were watching me. I told myself it was just plankton disturbed by the coming storm. But deep down, I knew better. In all my years studying marine life, I'd never seen plankton behave like that. The next morning brought an eerie calm and a disturbing discovery. Massive footprints emerged from the water onto the small strip of sand below my deck. They looked canine but huge, bigger than a wolf's and with strange webbing between the toe marks. The prints walked 20 feet up the beach, then returned to the water, as if something had come up from the Gulf to inspect. My home. The radio crackled that afternoon. It wasn't the Coast Guard, but a local fisherman named Victor Thibodeau, checking if I'd evacuated. "You're still there? Mon Dieu, you need to leave now." His Cajun accent was thick with worry. "Hurricane changed course, heading straight for you." "I'm prepared," I assured him. "What were those footprints you mentioned last week? The ones your grandfather warned about?" A long silence followed. Then, "Les loups de l'eau, the wolves of the water. They hunt during hurricanes when no one can escape." My grandfather said static cut him off as the storm's outer bands reached my location. The sky darkened to night at 2 in the afternoon. Rain hammered the roof like gunfire, and the wind screamed around the stilt house's corners. But something about that scream wasn't right. It had rhythm, purpose, almost like words. The stilt house shuddered as the full force of the hurricane hit. Waves crashed against the supports, spraying salt water against the windows. The electricity failed, leaving me with just emergency lights and the howling darkness outside. I'd made a terrible mistake staying here, but it was too late now. Through the rain-streaked windows, I watched a Coast Guard rescue boat fighting the waves about half a mile out. They must have come back for me despite the evacuation order. I grabbed my emergency light and flashed it. Through the window, signaling my position, the boat turned toward me. That's when I saw it, a massive shadow moving beneath the surface, circling the small vessel. I screamed warnings they couldn't possibly hear over the storm. The thing in the dale. Water attacked with terrifying speed. The boat heaved upward, then splintered like a toy. 4 men were thrown into the churning sea. I watched in horror as dark shapes dragged them under one by one. I slumped to the floor, my back against the wall, as the hurricane raged, and something much worse circled in the waters below. I was completely cut off. And I was no longer alone on this island. The eye of the hurricane brought an eerie quiet around midnight. The howling wind stopped so suddenly that the silence hurt my ears. Moonlight broke through the clouds, turning the floodwaters silver. Stood at the window counting my supplies. 3 gallons of fresh water, food for 2 weeks, first aid kit, flare gun with 4 flares. My satellite phone was dead. The antenna had broken off in the wind. A splash from below made me freeze. Something was moving in the floodwater around one of the stilt house's legs. I grabbed my flashlight, hands shaking, and pointed it down. A man was clinging to the wooden support, gasping for air. He wore a dark jacket and jeans, his black hair plastered to his pale face. "Help!" he called up, his voice breaking. "Please!" I hesitated. The Coast Guard boat had been destroyed just hours ago. How could anyone have survived those waters? But I couldn't leave him down there. "Hang on!" I called. "I'm dropping a rope." I threw down my emergency ladder and watched him climb, his movements quick and sure for someone who claimed to be drowning. When he reached the deck, I noticed something odd. His clothes were barely wet, just damp around the edges. "Thank you," he said, eyes darting around the small room. "I was fishing when the storm hit. Wave flipped my boat. The hurricane's been going for hours," I said. "You've been in the water all this time." He smiled, showing teeth that seemed too sharp in the dim light. "I'm a strong swimmer." I gave him a blanket and hot coffee, keeping the flare gun hidden in my pocket. Something felt wrong. His skin wasn't pruned from the water. He wasn't shivering despite the cool air, and he kept sniffing like he was smelling something. "What's your name?" I asked. "John," he said too quickly. "John Smith." Sure. And I'm the Queen of England. I'm Marianne. I'm a marine biologist studying the red tide. His eyes locked onto mine. They caught the lantern light strangely, reflecting it like a cat's eyes would. You should have left, he said softly. These waters aren't safe during storms. I backed up a step. Because of the wolves of the water? His coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. You know about them. A local fisherman mentioned something. What are they exactly? Just old stories, he said, but his eyes said different. They kept flicking to the windows, watching the water. I offered him the small guest bunk in the corner of the main room, keeping my bedroom door locked that night. Sleep came in fits and starts, my dreams full of howling that might have been. The returning wind or something else entirely. A splash woke me just before dawn. I moved quietly to the window and saw John in the water below. But something was wrong with his shape. His shoulders had grown broader, his head elongated. As he dove beneath the surface, I caught a glimpse of a powerful furred leg ending in webbed claws. I stumbled back from the window, heart hammering. This couldn't be real. I was hallucinating from stress and lack of sleep, but the empty blanket on the guest bunk was real enough. The hurricane winds died down by morning, but the water remained strangely disturbed. It formed perfect circles around the stilt house, like ripples in reverse, moving inward rather than outward. Sometimes the circles would stop, then start again in a different pattern, as if the water itself was thinking. I spent the day watching through windows and setting up my camera equipment. If these things were real, I needed proof. My chance came at sunset. The water beneath the deck bulged upward, and something emerged halfway, a creature straight from a nightmare. It had the head of a wolf, but bigger, with intelligent eyes set, in a face that was almost human in its expressions. Its torso was muscular and covered in sleek, dark fur that glistened with water. Below the waist, powerful hind legs ended in clawed, webbed feet, built for swimming. I fumbled with my camera, finally managing to record a few seconds before the creature submerged again. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I watched the playback. The image was blurry but unmistakable. This was no known animal. That night, the howling started. It matched the pitch and rhythm of the hurricane winds perfectly, though the storm had passed. The sound circled the stilt house, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Sometimes it formed patterns that almost sounded like words. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The howling seemed to vibrate through the floor and walls, through my very bones. Around 3 a.m., I heard the whop, whop, whop of helicopter blades. Rescue. At last, I grabbed my flare gun and ran to the upper deck, firing into the night sky. The helicopter's searchlight found me, and it began to descend. Then the water around the stilt house rose up in a perfect column, a waterspout forming out of nowhere on a now calm night. It twisted toward the helicopter, which veered away sharply. I screamed and waved, but the pilot had no choice. The helicopter retreated, its lights disappearing into the distance. I slumped to my knees on the deck. The waterspout collapsed immediately, the water returning to those strange circular patterns. They didn't want me to leave, and now I had proof they could control the water itself. Morning brought a new sound: boat engines. I rushed to the window and saw a National Guard rescue boat approaching, 4 soldiers in uniform scanning the waters. They must have been sent after the helicopter failed to reach me. "Go back!" I shouted, though I knew they couldn't hear me. "It's not safe!" As if summoned by my thoughts, dark shapes appeared in the water around their boat. I grabbed the radio, frantically turning dials. "National Guard rescue boat, turn around immediately. Hostile marine life in your vicinity. Do you copy?" Their radio crackled in response. "This is Sergeant Mills. We see something in the water. Are those dolphins?" "No, they're..." Before I could finish, One of the soldiers pointed his rifle at the water and fired. A terrible shriek rose from beneath the surface like metal tearing. Then everything happened at once. A wave rose up and flipped the boat. The soldiers fell into the water, shouting and struggling. Long, powerful arms reached up from below, dragging them under one by one. The water churned red, then grew still. 4 helmets floated on the surface, empty. I sank to the floor, shaking. They had died because of me, because I stayed when I should have left, because I fired that flare. Desperate to escape, I inflated the emergency raft I kept for collecting water samples. When night fell, I lowered it quietly and climbed down the ladder with a backpack of supplies and my camera. But as soon as the raft touched water, the calm surface began to spin. Slowly at first, then faster, forming a whirlpool around me. The raft spun in tighter and tighter circles, despite my frantic paddling. I had no choice but to grab the ladder and climb back up as my raft was sucked under and torn apart. They were controlling the water, using it like a weapon or a wall. I was their prisoner. Inside the stilt house, new horrors awaited. The fresh water in my containers began to move, sloshing from side to side, even when sitting on stable surfaces. I poured it out and set up buckets to catch rainwater instead. But when it rained that evening, the drops raised painful blisters on my skin, blisters that formed ridges like animal fur. I washed them off with my emergency alcohol wipes, shuddering as the patterns faded. The water itself was changing me. I needed answers. I dug through the old filing cabinet where previous researchers had left their notes. In the very back, I found a yellowed report from 1923 describing wolfmen rising from the deep after an oil company drilled into something they shouldn't have. The report mentioned attacks identical to what I was witnessing, creatures that walked like men but had wolf heads and could control water. The writer had been dismissed as insane. I wasn't crazy. These things were real, and they had been here. For nearly a century, I barricaded myself in the upper level of the stilt house. A shipping manifest in the old files mentioned a salt delivery, and I found 3 large bags in the storage closet. Something told me to create a barrier with it. I poured thick lines of salt across every entrance, every windowsill. When a tendril of water tried to seep under the door that night, it stopped at the salt line, recoiling like it had been burned. Salt. It was a weapon, at least a defensive one. The next day brought the worst psychological torture yet. As I sat huddled behind my salt barriers, I heard a voice calling from the water. "Mari girl, come help your old dad out." It was my father's voice, exactly as I remembered it from childhood. The special nickname only he used. But my father had died of a heart attack 3 months ago. His death was why I had taken this isolated assignment to grieve in peace. "Stop it," I whispered, hands over my ears. "You're not him. Mari girl, I'm cold down here, so cold and wet. Please come down." I bit my knuckles until they bled, refusing to look out the window where I knew something wearing my father's voice, but not his face, was waiting. On the 6th day of my imprisonment, a miracle. A small fishing boat approached, skillfully, navigating between the strange water patterns. A weathered man with white hair stood at the helm, carefully guiding the boat to the stilt house dock. "Dr. Everett?" he called up. "Victor Thibodeau. We spoke on the radio before the storm." I ran down to meet him, nearly crying with relief. "How did you get past them?" "I know their patterns," he said, tying off his boat. "Been fishing these waters 60 years. They leave me be mostly, long as I follow the rules." I let him inside, noticing how he carefully stepped over my salt lines without disturbing them. He nodded approvingly. "Smart woman. Salt burns them something. Fierce." "What are they?" I asked, finally face to face with someone who had answers. Victor sighed heavily, looking older than his years. "They were men once, a tribe that lived on these islands long before white folks came. They found a way to survive the hurricanes by making a deal with something deep in the Gulf, something ancient that was here before people. He accepted the coffee I offered, hand steady despite his age. The tribe would transform during storms, become water creatures until the danger passed. But something went wrong. Maybe they got greedy, asked for too much power. The change became permanent. I showed him my video footage. He nodded grimly. You've seen more than most who live to tell about it. Why are they keeping me here? Why? Not just kill me like the others? Victor wouldn't meet my eyes. They're curious about you, your equipment. They've never seen the things you have. Something about his tone made me uneasy. I glanced at his boat, so perfectly intact, despite the creatures that had destroyed larger, more powerful vessels. How do you navigate so safely through waters they control? I asked carefully. He remained silent too long before answering. Like I said, I follow their rules. And what rules are those? His eyes flicked to mine, then away. Sometimes they want things or people, outsiders, folks who don't belong here. A chill ran through me as I understood. You bring them sacrifices. He didn't deny it. It keeps the fishing grounds safe, keeps them contained to this area. My coffee cup slipped from suddenly numb fingers. You led the Coast Guard and National Guard here deliberately. You knew they would die. They should have stayed away, he said flatly, just like you should have. I backed toward the door, but Victor moved with surprising speed for his age, blocking my path. I'm sorry, Dr. Everett. Truly I am. But there's a second storm coming tonight. They get hungry during storms, and they've been waiting for you to come down voluntarily. I promised you would. Thunder boomed outside as I faced Victor across the small room. Rain began to pelt the windows, the second storm arriving right on schedule. I won't go down there, I said, edging toward the research equipment on my desk. Victor pulled a knife from his belt. You don't have a choice. Either you walk down or I drag you. A noise from below made us both freeze, splashing, heavier than raindrops. The whole stilt house trembled as something massive climbed one of the support legs. They're coming in, Victor whispered, real fear in his voice now. That's not supposed to happen. They never come inside. Through the floor I could hear claws scraping wood, not just from one direction, but all around us. Multiple creatures were climbing up. How many are there? I asked, keeping my voice steady despite my terror. 8, maybe 10 in the pack, Victor said, but there's one bigger than the rest, the first one. If he's coming up... The old man's face went pale. Whatever bargain he'd made with these things was breaking down. Glass shattered downstairs. They were coming through the windows. Victor ran to the stairs, throwing salt in a wide arc. Inhuman shrieks rose from below. During the distraction, I lunged for my desk and powered up my underwater research equipment. The sonar device I used to map ocean currents hummed to life. Victor turned to me. What are you doing? Testing a theory. I adjusted the frequency dials, remembering how the creatures had reacted when the soldier fired his gun. Not to the bullet, but to the sound. What if certain frequencies hurt them? A massive crash from below. They had broken through Victor's salt barrier. A dark shape moved up the stairs, larger than a man. I caught glimpses of wet fur, glowing eyes, an elongated snout filled with teeth. I hit the activation button on my sonar device. A high-pitched pulse filled the room, inaudible to human ears, but visible on my equipment's display. The effect was immediate. The creature on the stairs writhed in pain, its howl so loud I had to cover my ears. It retreated, falling backward. Down the steps, Victor looked at me with new respect. How did you... They use sound to communicate, I said. Certain frequencies must hurt them. Hope flickered for the first time in days. Help me modify this equipment. We might have a way. Out? For the next hour, we worked frantically to create portable sonar devices from my research equipment. The creatures circled below, howling their rage, but keeping their distance from the sound waves. The boat's our only chance, Victor said as we finished. We leave at first light when they're weakest. Your sound thing will clear a path. As dawn approached, the rain eased, but didn't stop. We gathered our makeshift weapons and prepared to make a run for the boat. But as we reached the lower level, Water began seeping through every crack in the walls, defying gravity to form a barrier at the door. Victor paled. That's the first one's power. The others can push water around, but only he can make it disobey nature like that. On cue, something massive moved in the water beyond the windows. Twice the size of the others, it rose until a wolf-like head the size of an oil drum stared in at us. But the eyes were disturbingly human, ancient and full of cold intelligence. Beside me, Victor began to shake. "We can make a deal," he called out. "Take her, I brought her like I promised." I activated my sonar device, aiming it at the window. The creature flinched but didn't retreat. It was stronger than the others. Then, in my head, I heard a voice, not through my ears but directly in my mind. "You belong with us now. The water has marked you." I thought of the blisters, the strange patterns they formed. Horror washed over me as I realized what was happening. They hadn't kept me prisoner just for curiosity. They had been changing me, preparing me. "No," I whispered. "Your kind destroys, drills, poisons. We protect what sleeps below." Images flooded my mind, something vast and ancient resting in the deepest trench of the Gulf. Something that had been there long before humans walked the earth, now stirring as ocean temperatures rose and drilling vibrations disturbed its slumber. Victor broke toward the door, desperation overcoming his fear. "Take her, not me. I've served you for years." The water barrier parted for him. He sprinted for his boat, fumbling with the ropes. For a moment I thought they were letting him go. Then water rose up around him in a perfect bubble, encasing him completely. He pounded against it, face contorted in a silent scream as he drowned in open air. The bubble collapsed, leaving nothing behind. He outlived his usefulness, as all your kind does. Surrounded, nowhere to run, I made my final stand. I connected all my sonar devices together, creating a feedback loop that would generate a massive sonic pulse. "It might kill me, but it would hurt them more. You would die to escape us?" "I would die to stop you," I answered. Brave, foolish, but there is another way. The first one pressed closer to the window, water swirling around it like a living cape. "Join us willingly. Learn our secrets. Help us protect what must not wake." My finger hovered over the activation button. "Why would I believe you? You've killed innocent people." "Not innocent. Trespassers, destroyers. But you understand the water. You respect it." I hesitated. Was this a trick? But something about the creature's ancient eyes held a terrible truth. Choose. I made my decision. I hit the button. The sonic blast was deafening, even to human ears. Every window in the stilt house shattered. The creatures thrashed in agony, sinking beneath the waves. Even the first one retreated, its mental voice cutting off mid-scream. I ran for Victor's abandoned boat, ears bleeding from the sound, but legs still working. The engine sputtered to life as I twisted the key, and I steered toward the open water, toward the mainland. Behind me, the stilt house, my prison for nearly 2 weeks, grew smaller. My hearing was damaged, perhaps permanently. Sounds came muffled, distant, but as I sped towards safety, I realized this might be a blessing. If I couldn't hear their calls, maybe they couldn't reach me. 3 hours later, a Coast Guard cutter intercepted my boat. I collapsed into the arms of the rescue team, finally safe. Or so I thought. At the hospital, doctors treated me for dehydration, exposure and hearing loss. Tests were run. Blood was drawn. I was given a room with a window overlooking the harbor. On the 3rd day, I noticed the tide making strange patterns in the harbor water. Circular patterns, moving inward, like the water around my stilt house. The doctor came in that afternoon looking troubled. "Dr. Everett, there are anomalies in your blood work, changes at the cellular level we can't explain." I felt cold despite the warm room. "What kind of changes?" "Almost like your DNA is rearranging itself." He frowned at his clipboard. "Have you been exposed to any unusual chemicals or radiation?" I didn't answer. Instead, I asked for a newspaper. The front page showed reports of strange water disturbances at coastal research stations across the Gulf of Mexico. They were spreading, and somehow I was connected to them now. That night, the power went out as another hurricane approached the coast, earlier in the season than any on record. In the darkness of my hospital room, water began to seep under the door, forming a small pool on the floor. The pool rippled, and then the first one's voice was in my head again, clearer than ever. You cannot escape what you are becoming. The change has begun. I looked down at my hands in the dim emergency lighting. The skin between my fingers had grown thin, almost translucent, stretching into webs. Others will die if you stay. Join us willingly, and we will spare this place. I understood then. Whatever they had done to me, I was becoming a beacon, calling them to me. Everyone around me was in danger. In the confusion of the power outage, I slipped out of the hospital, drawn to the water like a compass pointing north. The harbor was unnaturally calm despite the approaching storm, the water parting for me as I waded in. The first one waited offshore, its massive shape visible only as a darker shadow against the night water. You understand now. The ancient one stirs, only we can keep it sleeping. If I join you, I said, the water now up to my chest, you'll leave the coastal cities alone? We defend. We do not attack without cause. I thought of all I was leaving behind, my research, my colleagues, a normal human life. Then I thought of what I would gain, answers to questions no human had ever answered, knowledge of creatures that had existed alongside us, unseen for centuries. The change was already happening. I could feel it in my bones, my skin, my lungs that suddenly craved the water more than air. I accept, I whispered. Pain shot through my body as the transformation accelerated. My skin hardened in patches, growing the same sleek fur I had seen on the creatures. My face elongated, teeth sharpening. Gills opened along my neck, automatically drawing oxygen from the water. The first one approached, towering over me, but I wasn't afraid anymore. Now you will help us guard what sleeps below. I dove beneath the surface, following the pack into the deeper water. Behind us, the hurricane changed course, veering away from the populated coast. 1 year later, marine researchers recorded unusual sonar patterns near my old stilt house, patterns that matched human speech. They rebuilt the research station, installing new equipment to study the strange phenomena. The new researcher found journal pages on the desk one morning, written in what experts later confirmed was my handwriting. The ink was still wet with salt water. The pages contained warnings about drilling operations and changing water temperatures, about what might wake if humans didn't change their ways. They didn't listen, of course. Humans rarely do. Every hurricane season, strange wolf-like shapes are sometimes glimpsed in the churning waters during storms. Coastal residents learn to fear not just the wind and waves, but what rides them. They whisper about the woman who speaks to the wolves of the water, her form only half human now, leading something ancient and vast that remains just below the surface. I still hear them at night, the voices in the trees, the faces in the bark. Sometimes I wake up checking my skin for roots. That's what happens when you survive something that shouldn't exist. My name is Lewis Caldwell, and I'm going to tell you why you should never go into the deep woods of the Ozarks alone. When I came back from Vietnam in '68, I couldn't sleep without seeing the faces of the dead. The army doctors called it post-traumatic stress. I called it hell. Every car backfire sent me diving to the ground. Every helicopter made me taste blood. I needed quiet. I needed to be alone. That's why the hunting lodge seemed perfect when I found it in the paper. Abandoned property, priced. To sell. Remote location, private lake access. The ad might as well have said, perfect for broken soldiers who can't stand to be around people anymore. I bought it with my service pay without even seeing it first. The drive into the Ozarks took me through winding roads that got narrower and darker as I went. The trees grew thicker, blocking out the sun, until it was just tiny patches of light breaking through the leaves. By the time I reached the valley where my new home waited, it felt like twilight even though it was only noon. The lodge itself wasn't much, just a 2-story wooden cabin with a stone foundation, sitting about 50 yards from a perfectly round lake. Something about that lake bothered me right away. Water doesn't form perfect circles in nature, but I was too tired to care. Inside, the place was covered in dust. Animal heads lined the walls, deer, bear, fox, all with glass eyes that seemed to follow me. I dragged my duffel bag upstairs, picked the bedroom furthest from the stairs, and slept for 14 hours straight. The next few days, I worked on making the place livable, fixed the leaky roof, got the generator running, cleared out the trash. It felt good to work with my hands again, to have a purpose, even a small one. It was when I was pulling up the rotted boards on the kitchen floor that I found it, a metal ring hidden under the fridge. When I pulled, a trapdoor opened to reveal a set of narrow stairs leading down into darkness. I should have closed it right then, should have nailed it shut and pretended I never saw it. But curiosity is a powerful thing. The root cellar below was cold and smelled like wet earth. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing first on shelves of canned goods, then on something that made my blood freeze. Animals. Dozens of stuffed taxidermied animals, but not displayed as trophies. They were posed like people. A fox sitting in a tiny chair, paws resting on a miniature table. A raccoon standing upright, dressed in doll clothes. A deer on its hind legs, front hooves raised like it was dancing. And, behind them, a wooden desk with leather-bound journals stacked neatly in a row. I opened the most recent one with shaking hands and read the careful handwriting. April 17th, 1963. The taker has been active again. Found Wilson's dog skinned by the creek. 3 days later, Wilson himself went missing. I watched his cabin. Something wearing Wilson's face came out this morning. It moved all wrong. The real Wilson is gone now. I slammed the journal shut and backed away. My boot kicked something that rolled across the dirt floor, a glass jar. Inside was a perfect, wax-like cast of a human face, mouth open in a silent scream. I ran up those stairs faster than I'd ever moved, slamming the trapdoor shut behind me. That night, as I tried to convince myself I'd just found the workspace of a disturbed taxidermist, I noticed something I hadn't before. The forest was completely silent. No crickets, no frogs, no owls. The woods around a normal cabin should be alive with sounds, especially at night. This silence pressed against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat. Then, from somewhere in the distance came the call of a whippoorwill. It sounded almost right, but the rhythm was off. 3 beats instead of 2. Then silence again. The next morning, I told myself I was being paranoid. 2. Many nights in the jungle had made me jumpy. I decided to walk the property line, get a better feel for my new home. That's when I saw the first face in the trees, a perfect impression of human features pressed into the bark, like someone had been shoved against it with incredible force. The face was frozen in terror, mouth open, eyes wide. I touched it with trembling fingers and felt the texture of skin, not bark. I backed away, tripping over a fallen branch, and that's when I heard footsteps approaching through the underbrush. I reached for a gun that wasn't there anymore, another Vietnam habit I couldn't shake. Instead of some monster, an old man emerged from between the trees. He was tall and thin, with a white beard and eyes so pale blue they looked almost colorless. "You, the new owner?" he asked, not bothering with hello. I nodded, trying to calm my racing heart. "Lewis Caldwell. Elijah Winters. I live about 2 miles that way." He pointed vaguely north. "Figured I should warn you about this place." "Warn me?" Elijah's eyes darted around like he was making sure we were alone. "These woods ain't right. Never have been. The first settlers knew it. The Indians before them knew it too. That's why nobody builds here. Because of faces in trees, I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. Because of the hollow folk, he said simply. They look like people, but they ain't. They're empty inside. They take folks, wear their skins, steal their memories, been doing it for generations. In Vietnam, I'd met villagers with all sorts of superstitions. I figured this was more of the same. Look, Mr. Winters, you don't believe me, he shrugged. Nobody does till they see it themselves. Just remember, if someone you know starts acting strange or moving funny or can't remember things they should, that ain't them anymore. And don't go near that lake. That's where they come from. Before I could ask anything else, dark clouds rolled in overhead, bringing with them the smell of snow. In October, in the Ozarks. Storm's coming, Elijah said, already walking away. Bad one. Road will be blocked for days. Hope you got supplies. By nightfall, 6 inches of snow covered everything, and my truck wouldn't start, no matter how many times I turned the key. The radio reported no snow anywhere else in the county. As darkness fell completely, I locked all the doors and windows. For the first time since leaving Vietnam, I wished I still had my service rifle. Something was watching me from the woods. I could feel it. I woke up to scratching sounds on my front porch, the kind of sounds that make your skin crawl. Soft at first, then more urgent. I grabbed a kitchen knife and crept to the door, heart pounding in my chest. When I opened it, no one was there, just the endless white of fresh snow and my own footprints from yesterday. Then I looked down. Elijah's dog, a black lab mix I'd seen, with him briefly, sat perfectly upright on my welcome mat. But something was wrong. The dog wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. It was just the skin, arranged to look like a sitting dog. Empty inside, like a puppet without a hand. I stumbled back, bumping into the wall. My breath made little clouds in the cold air as I tried not to throw up. The dog's eyes were gone, leaving dark, empty holes that seemed to stare at me anyway. Where was the rest of the dog? Where was the blood? There wasn't a single drop of red on the clean, white snow. I wrapped the dog's remains in an old tarp and buried it as best I could in the frozen ground. As I worked, the shovel hitting hard dirt, my mind kept flashing back to digging graves in Vietnam, the jungle heat, the smell of death, the faces of men I couldn't save. The flashback hit me so hard I fell to my knees in the snow. For a minute, I wasn't in the Ozarks anymore. I was back in the jungle, enemy fire cracking overhead, Rodriguez bleeding out beside me. "Dig faster, Caldwell," my sergeant's voice screamed in my head. "They're coming!" I blinked hard, forcing myself back to the present. The cold snow under my hands, the silent forest around me, no gunfire, no screams, just quiet, too quiet. I finished burying the dog and went back inside. I pushed a heavy bookshelf in front of the door and checked all the windows twice. Then I sat in a chair facing the entrance, knife in hand, and waited. Around noon there was a knock, 3 slow, deliberate taps. I gripped the knife tighter and approached the door. "Who is it?" I called. "It's Elijah, son, looking for my dog. Have you seen him?" Something in his voice sounded off, like someone doing a good but not perfect impression of the old man. "No," I lied. "Haven't seen him." A long pause. "Mind if I come in? Getting mighty cold out here." I peered through the peephole. It was Elijah, all right. Same beard, same coat. But something wasn't right. His face looked uneven somehow, like one side was slightly lower than the other, and he was standing too still, not shifting his weight like a normal person would. "Actually, I'm not feeling well," I said. "Might be contagious. Best if you don't come in." Another long pause. Then, "I'll come back later then, when you're feeling better." I watched through the window as he walked away. His movements were too smooth, like he was gliding rather than walking. No one moves like that on snow and ice. No one human anyway. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the old lodge had me jumping, knife at the ready. Around midnight, I heard what sounded like trees falling in the distance, heavy things moving in the forest. When morning came, I looked out the window and froze. The trees around my property had moved. I know how that sounds, but it's the truth. Trees that had been 30 yards from my house were now in a perfect circle around it, about 20 feet away from the walls, like sentinels. And on the one directly in front of my bedroom window was a face. My face, pressed into the bark like the one I'd seen before. Eyes wide with fear. I backed away from the window and knocked over a lamp. The crash it made was too loud in the quiet house. As I bent to pick up the broken pieces, movement outside caught my eye. I grabbed my binoculars from my duffel bag and focused them on the edge of the forest, past the circle of trees. Something was standing there, partially hidden by branches, tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, thin like a sapling. At first, I thought it was just a dead tree. Then it moved. Its body looked like branches twisted into a human shape, covered by a thin layer that reminded me of the sticky film on tree sap. And inside that film, faces swirled and pressed against the surface, dozens of them, pushing out like they were trying to scream through a plastic bag. I dropped the binoculars and ran to the bathroom, barely making it before I threw up. When I could breathe again, I splashed cold water on my face and looked in the mirror. "Pull it together, Caldwell," I whispered to myself. "You survived, Nam. You can survive this." But Nam had rules. The enemy was human. They bled when shot. They died and stayed dead. Whatever was out there didn't play by those rules. I spent the rest of the day turning the lodge into a fortress. I boarded up windows, set up tripwires made from fishing line and cans, heated knives in the fireplace until they glowed red, then drove them into the wooden floor by each entrance. Makeshift punji stakes like we'd used in the jungle. As night fell, snow began again, heavier this time. The wind howled around the eaves of the lodge, sounding almost like voices. I huddled by the fire, jumping at every sound. Then came a pounding on the door that nearly stopped my heart. "Hello? Is anyone there? Please, we need help." A woman's voice, young, scared. I crept to the door, knife ready. "Who are you?" "Margaret Keene," the voice called back. "My husband David and I were hiking when the storm hit. We've been walking for hours. Please, we're freezing." I hesitated. What if they weren't really hikers? What if they were those things? "Show me your faces," I called through the door. Through the window, 2 figures moved to the large front window. A woman with long brown hair and a tall man with glasses. They looked normal, human. Their breath fogged the glass as they pressed close. "Please," the woman, Margaret, said again. "We won't last the night out here." I was torn. Every instinct screamed danger, but I couldn't leave real people to freeze to death because I was scared of shadows. "Stand back from the door," I said finally. "Way back." I moved the bookshelf and opened the door just wide enough for them to slip in one at a time. The woman came first, shivering so hard her teeth chattered. The man followed, stomping snow from his boots. "Thank you," he said, extending his hand. "David Keene." I shook it quickly, noting that it felt warm, human. "Lewis Caldwell, there's hot coffee in the kitchen." As they warmed up by the fire, they told me they'd been on a weekend hiking trip when the freak snowstorm hit. They'd lost the trail and had been walking blindly when they spotted smoke from my chimney. It all sounded normal, reasonable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake letting them in. "Is everything okay?" Margaret asked, noticing me staring. "You seem tense." "It's nothing," I lied. "I'm just not used to company." I set them up in the spare bedroom, as far from mine as possible. Before going to my room, I wedged a chair under my doorknob and kept my knife under my pillow. Sleep came in fits and starts, filled with dreams of trees walking on twisted root feet and things wearing human skins that didn't quite fit right. Woke to David shaking my shoulder, his face pale with panic. "Lewis, wake up, Margaret's gone." "What do you mean she's gone?" I grabbed my knife from under the pillow. David ran his hands through his hair. I woke up and she wasn't in bed. I thought maybe she went to the bathroom, but I've checked everywhere. I pulled on my boots. When did you last see her? We went to sleep around midnight. That's the last time I saw her. Something cold settled in my stomach. I checked the front door, still locked from the inside with the bookshelf in place. All windows secure, no sign of forced entry. She couldn't have gone outside, I said, more to myself than to David. We grabbed flashlights and checked every room again. Nothing. Then David called from the kitchen. "Lewis, the basement door is open." My blood turned to ice. The root cellar. We descended the narrow stairs, flashlight beams bouncing off dirt walls. The taxidermied animals seemed to watch us as we moved past them. "What the hell is all this?" David whispered. I didn't answer. My light had caught something on the floor, Margaret's jacket crumpled in a heap. I approached slowly and nudged it with my foot. Something rolled out, something that made both of us step back in horror. It was a perfect cast of Margaret's body. Every detail, every curve, even her fingerprints, made from what looked like hardened amber-colored tree sap. Hollow inside, empty, like a mold someone had used and discarded. David fell to his knees beside it. What? What is this? Where's Margaret?" I couldn't answer. My mind was racing back to Elijah's warning about the hollow folk, the journal entries, about the taker. "We need to leave," I said, pulling David to his feet. "Right now." "I'm not leaving without Margaret." "She's not here anymore," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And we won't be either if we don't go now." We rushed upstairs. I grabbed my backpack and stuffed it with supplies, water bottles, energy bars, matches, my army knife. Then I remembered my truck wouldn't start. "We'll have to walk out," I told David. "It's about 15 miles to the main road." The snow had stopped, but the early morning air was bitter cold as we stepped outside. The forest was shrouded in mist, the strange circle of trees looming around us like watchers. We'd made it about 50 yards when David froze, pointing ahead. "Look!" Through the trees, two figures stood perfectly still. One was tall and branch-like, the taker in its true form. Beside it stood something that looked human, Margaret, but not Margaret. Her movements were all wrong as she tilted her head to look at us, like a puppet on strings. "Margaret!" David called, starting toward her. I grabbed his arm. "That's not her." "What are you talking about? She's right there." The thing that looked like Margaret smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. Those were empty, dead. Then, as we watched, the taker's thin, branch-like fingers reached for her. Its skin, that clear, sap-like membrane, stretched and enveloped her. She didn't struggle, didn't scream. She just stood there as she was pulled into the creature. I saw her face press against that membrane from the inside, joining the others swirling beneath the surface. Then the taker seemed to absorb her completely. A moment later, it dropped something to the ground. Margaret's body, now emptied of everything that made her human. David screamed. The sound echoed through the trees. The creature's head snapped toward us, and I knew we had only seconds. "Run!" I yelled, pulling David with me. We crashed through the underbrush, heading away from the lodge, away from that thing. I tried to keep the rising sun on our left, knowing the main road was east of us. But something strange happened. After 20 minutes of running, we emerged from a thick stand of pines and found ourselves back at the lodge, exactly where we'd started. "That's impossible," David panted. "We were going straight east." We tried again and again. Each time, no matter which direction we went, we ended up back at the lodge. It was like the forest itself was steering us home. By midday, exhausted and terrified, we barricaded ourselves inside again. David hadn't spoken in hours, his eyes vacant with shock. I noticed changes in the yard while we were gone. The plants around the lodge had changed. Flowers had grown overnight despite the snow, their petals arranged in patterns that looked disturbingly like eyes. Vines had crept up the walls, their tendrils forming what looked like long, thin fingers reaching for the windows. The forest was transforming, becoming more like the thing that lived in it. I heated up some canned soup and forced David to eat. "We need to figure out what that thing is," I said, "and how to kill it." "Kill it?" David looked up, eyes suddenly focusing. "How do you kill something like that?" "Everything can die," I said, thinking back to Vietnam. "We just need to find its weakness." As evening approached, I was checking our barricades when I heard the front door open. I spun around, knife raised, to see David standing there. "What are you doing?" I hissed. "Close the door." He smiled, a calm, easy smile that didn't match the situation at all. "I went to get more firewood. It's getting cold." But his arms were empty. And I suddenly realized I couldn't remember where David had been for the past hour. I'd assumed he was resting, but I looked closer at him. He looked exactly like David, spoke like David, but something was off. His movements were too smooth, too perfect. And when he passed a mirror in the hallway, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. He cast no reflection. This wasn't David. I kept my face neutral, pretending nothing was wrong. "Good idea. Why don't you check the kitchen for more food while I stack the wood?" Not David nodded and headed for the kitchen. As soon as he was out of sight, I ran upstairs, to the master bedroom, where I'd hidden the journals from the root cellar under the mattress. I flipped through them frantically, looking for anything that might help. Most entries were similar to the first one I'd read. Reports of people gone. Missing, then returning changed. But toward the end of the most recent journal, I found photographs, black and white images of the lodge dating back to the 1890s. Different owners in different time periods, but in each photo, I could see the same faces in the background, unchanged. Despite decades passing between pictures, people who didn't age, people who weren't people at all. Then I found a newspaper clipping from 1963. Local hunter claims forest creature, responsible for disappearances. Elijah Winters, 36, tells authorities that a supernatural entity is behind the recent string of missing persons in Ozark Valley. Officials dismiss claims as backwoods superstition. Elijah had been fighting this thing for decades, which meant the Elijah I met couldn't have been the real one. The real Elijah would be in his 70s. Now, a floorboard creaked behind me. I turned to see not David standing in the doorway, head tilted at an unnatural angle. "What are you reading, Lewis?" he asked, his voice perfectly pleasant. "Just some old journals I found," I said, closing the book casually. "History of the Lodge." He smiled, that empty smile again. "Find anything interesting?" "Not really. Just maintenance records." Not David stepped into the room. His movements had changed, becoming less human with each passing minute, as if he was forgetting how to pretend. "You know, don't you?" he said, his voice shifting slightly, taking on an echo-like quality. I gripped the knife in my pocket. "Know what?" "About us. About what we are." His head tilted further, almost to his shoulder. "About what's happening to you." He moved too fast for me to react, grabbing my arm with inhuman strength. His fingers felt wrong, too hard, like wood rather than flesh. "You're already changing," he said, his face inches from mine. "We're in your head now, in your memories." With my free hand, I pulled out my knife and stabbed him in the chest. The blade sank in with a sound like hitting wet wood. No blood came out. Not. David looked down at the knife, then back at me, that empty smile never faltering. "That won't work. Lewis." I yanked the knife out and ran, shoving him aside with all my strength. He fell against the wall, his movements suddenly jerky, like a marionette with tangled strings. I raced downstairs and out the back door, panic overriding logic. The sun was setting, painting the snow orange and red. I needed a plan, a weapon, something more effective than a knife. Then I remembered my army training, fire. We'd used fire in Vietnam to clear areas, to drive out the enemy. I ran to the shed behind the lodge where I'd stored extra gas for the generator. If I couldn't escape, maybe I could create a defensive perimeter, burn away the trees that had moved too close to the house, cut off whatever connection the taker had to the lodge. As I collected what I needed, a strange thought nagged at me. Not David had said I was already changing. What did that mean? And why did some of my memories before Vietnam suddenly feel inserted? Like watching someone else's home movies rather than remembering my own life. I pushed the thought away. I couldn't afford doubts now. I had to focus on survival. With gas cans and matches in hand, I set to work creating a fire line between the lodge and the encroaching forest. The flames caught quickly, spreading from tree to tree in a circle around the property. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking. Through the flames and smoke, I could see dark shapes moving in the forest. Dozens of them, all with that same too smooth way of moving, all coming toward the lodge. The siege had begun. The fire kept them back, at least for a while. I watched from the upstairs window as they gathered at the edge of the flames. People who weren't people. Some I recognized from the old photographs. Some were strangers. One was Margaret, her movements stiff and wrong, and among them was not David, standing just beyond the fire line, staring up at my window with that empty smile. Pulled the curtains closed and checked my supplies. 2 gas cans left, enough food for maybe 3 days, plenty of water from melted snow, but no way to call for help. The phone lines had been down since the storm, and I had no cell signal this deep in the valley. The knock at the front door made me freeze. "Hello? Anybody home?" "Forest Service." I crept to the window and peered out. A man in a Green Ranger uniform stood on my porch, looking concerned at the ring of fire around the property. "Sir," he called again, "we got reports of smoke. Is everything okay?" He looked normal, sounded normal, but so had not David at first. "Who are you?" I called through the door. "Walter Mills, Park Ranger. Mind if I come in? We need to talk about this fire. It's a serious hazard." I hesitated. Could I trust him? But if he was really a ranger, he might have a radio, a way to call for help. "Show me your ID," I said through the crack in the curtains. "Hold it up to the window." He pulled out a wallet and pressed his badge against the glass. It looked real enough. Forest Service shield, his photo, the name Walter Mills. I opened the door just wide enough for him to slip through, then quickly closed and locked it behind him. "Thank you," Ranger Mills said, removing his hat. He looked to be in his 50s, with graying hair at his temples and tired eyes. "Now, can you tell me why you've set a fire circle around your property? That's extremely dangerous, sir." "To keep them out," I said, watching his reaction carefully. "Keep who out?" "The things in the forest, the ones that look like people but aren't." Mills's expression shifted to concern. "Sir, are you feeling all right? Have you been taking any medications?" "I'm not crazy," I snapped. "I've seen them. They took the woman who was staying here. They replaced the man with something else." Mills held up his hands. Okay, why don't we sit down and you can tell me everything from the beginning?" I led him to the kitchen, keeping the knife in my pocket within easy reach. As Mills sat down at the table, something fell from his coat pocket, a newspaper clipping. I picked it up before he could, and felt my blood run cold as I read the headline, "Forest Ranger Walter Mills found dead in apparent hiking accident." The date on the clipping was 3 months ago. I looked up to see Mills smiling, that same empty smile I'd seen on Not David. "You shouldn't have seen that, Lewis." I backed away, pulling my knife. "What are you?" Mills, or the thing pretending to be Mills, stood up. His movements had that same unnatural smoothness. "We are the forest. We are everyone the forest has ever taken, and soon we will be you too." I lunged with the knife, but he moved impossibly fast, catching my wrist in a grip that felt like tree bark against my skin. "You can't stop us," he said, his voice taking on that same echo quality as Not David's had. "The taker has chosen this. Valley has chosen you." I twisted free and ran for the front door, throwing it open. Outside, the fire was dying down, and through the thinning smoke I could see them, dozens of them surrounding the lodge. Former owners, hikers who'd gone missing, all standing perfectly still, all watching the house with empty eyes. And behind them, towering over the trees, was the taker itself, no longer hiding. Its massive form looked like a tangle of branches and roots formed into a vaguely human shape, covered in that clear, sap-like skin. Countless faces pressed against that skin from the inside, their mouths moving as if trying to speak. Not Mills was right behind me. I turned and swung the knife, catching him across the chest. The wound split open to reveal not blood, but a cross-section of wood grain and amber fluid. I shoved past him back into the house and ran for the kitchen, grabbing one of the remaining gas cans. If I was going to die, I'd take as many of them with me as I could. But as I turned to head back outside, the floor beneath me creaked and then gave way completely. I crashed through rotted boards into darkness, landing hard in what felt like soft dirt. When I caught my breath and looked around, I realized I was in a part of the root cellar I hadn't seen before, a narrow tunnel extending beyond the foundation of the house. My flashlight had fallen with me, and when I clicked it on, the beam revealed a wooden door at the end of the tunnel. Behind me, I could hear Not Mills searching the house, calling my name in that too pleasant voice. I had no choice but to go forward. The door was old and swollen with moisture, but it gave way when I pushed hard enough. Beyond was a small, earth-walled room with a cot, a table with a lantern, and my heart nearly stopped. A person. An old man lay on the cot, so thin he was nearly a skeleton. His white beard reached to his chest, and his pale blue eyes opened as I entered. "You're not one of them," he whispered, his voice raspy from disuse. "They don't use doors." I approached slowly. "Who are you?" "Elijah Winters," he said. "The real one." I knelt beside the cot. "How long have you been down here?" "Don't know anymore. Years, maybe." His breathing was labored, each word an effort. "They keep me alive. Need me fresh." "Fresh for what?" "For the taker. It needs living tissue to make its copies. Takes a little each time, been feeding on me for years." I remembered the false Elijah I'd met, how he'd seemed off somehow. "Why doesn't it just take you completely, like the others?" Elijah's eyes closed briefly as if the conversation was exhausting him. "It keeps a few of us alive, like templates. Easier to maintain the copies that way." I heard creaking from above. They were searching the house, looking for me. We didn't have much time. "How do I kill it?" I asked urgently. "The taker, how do I stop it?" Elijah's eyes opened again, more focused now. "The lake. It's not really a lake. It's the taker's true form. I don't understand. It's old, ancient, was here before people, some kind of fungus that learned to mimic. First animals, then people once we arrived." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "The lake is its core. The walking parts are just extensions." A crash from above. They'd found the hole I'd fallen through. "How do I kill it?" I repeated desperately. "Poison," Elijah said. "The core. Kill the lake, kill the taker." Poison. I had nothing that could poison an entire lake. Then I remembered something from my duffel bag, something I'd carried back from Vietnam and never quite been able to throw away. A small canister of the defoliant chemicals we'd used to clear jungle areas, highly toxic. I'd kept it as a grim souvenir, a reminder of what we'd done there. Would chemicals work? Powerful ones? Elijah nodded weakly. "If they're strong. Enough. But there's something else you should know." He gripped my arm with surprising strength. "It gets confused by things it hasn't seen before. Original things, art, music it doesn't know." Footsteps in the tunnel now. They were coming. "Go," Elijah whispered. "I'll distract them. Give you time. Come." "With me," I urged, but he shook his head. Too weak, been its prisoner too long. His eyes held mine. End this, Lewis. Free us all. I squeezed his hand once, then moved to the far wall where I could see another door, another exit. As I slipped through, I heard Elijah begin to sing. An old folk song, his voice surprisingly strong. The footsteps in the tunnel stopped as, if confused by the unexpected sound, the second tunnel led upward, eventually opening into what looked like an old storm cellar behind the lodge. I emerged into the evening air, away from the main group of mimics still gathered at the front of the house. I slipped around to where my truck was parked, praying my duffel bag was still there. It was, shoved under the seat where I'd left it. And inside, wrapped in an old t-shirt, was the small metal canister of defoliant. Not enough to poison a whole lake, but maybe enough to poison the taker if I could get it to the core. A plan began to form, a desperate one. I would need bait, something the taker couldn't resist. From the front of the lodge, I heard a scream. Elijah's voice suddenly cut short. They'd found him, which meant they'd be looking for me next. I clutched the canister to my chest and ran toward the trees, away from the lodge, away from the mimics, toward the lake, toward the taker's heart. Behind me, I heard them coming. That strange, not quite right sound of too many feet moving in perfect unison. The hunt had begun. The lake looked different in the moonlight, too still, too perfect. No ripples disturbed its surface despite the light breeze. No frogs called from its edges. It wasn't really water, I realized. It was the taker in its original form, a massive pool of that same clear, sap-like substance I'd seen covering its walking parts. I crouched behind a fallen log, clutching the canister of defoliant. My plan was simple. Get to the center of the lake somehow, open the canister, and let the chemicals do their work. But how to reach the middle without touching that deadly surface? The answer came as I spotted an old rowboat pulled up on the shore, half hidden under branches. It looked ancient but solid enough. If I could get to the center, dump the chemicals, and paddle back before the taker realized what was happening. But I'd need a distraction. Something to keep the mimics busy while I poisoned their source. A twig snapped behind me. I spun around, raising the heavy canister as a weapon. "Lewis," a familiar voice, weak and strained. "Is that you?" From the shadows emerged Elijah, the real Elijah, barely able to walk, using a branch as a cane. Blood dripped from a wound on his forehead. "Elijah? How did you escape?" They were distracted, all rushing outside at once. He coughed, a wet, painful sound. "Followed your tracks here." "You shouldn't have come," I said, helping him sit against a tree. "You're too weak." He shook his head. "Had to. Need to finish this." His pale eyes fixed on mine. "I've been fighting this thing for 50 years, Lewis, watching it take person after person. I'm not going to miss its end." In the distance, we could hear them coming, that strange, synchronized movement through the forest, growing closer. "What's your plan?" Elijah asked. I showed him the canister and pointed to the boat. "Get to the middle, dump this in." Elijah nodded. "It'll work, but you'll need bait." "Bait? Something it wants badly, something it can't resist." He pulled up, his sleeve, revealing skin mottled with strange growths, tiny root-like structures just beneath the surface. "Me. It's been feeding on me for years. Has part of me already inside it. The taker can't resist completing what it started." I understood what he was suggesting. "No, there has to be another way." "There isn't." Elijah's eyes were clear, determined despite his weakened state. "I'm dead anyway, Lewis. Let me choose how. I go." The sounds of pursuit grew louder. We were out of time. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Get in the boat, get ready. I'll draw them to me away from the shore. When the taker comes for me, that's your chance. It'll be distracted." Elijah gripped my arm. "Don't hesitate, don't look back, just do what needs doing." I helped him to his feet, supporting his weight. "Thank you," I said simply. Elijah managed a weak smile. Been waiting 50 years for this, son. It's my pleasure. I made my way to the boat while Elijah limped in the opposite direction toward the sounds of the pursuing mimics. The old rowboat was heavier than it looked, but I managed to drag it to the water's edge. The lake's surface looked like glass, too perfect to be natural. I hesitated before touching the boat to it, half expecting the vessel to be absorbed immediately, but nothing happened. The boat sat on the surface like it would on normal water. I climbed in carefully, the canister tucked securely under one arm, and began to row toward the center. The oars made no sound as they dipped into the lake. No splashes, no drips. It was like rowing through thick syrup. From the shore came shouts and a strange, high-pitched keening sound that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I risked a glance back and saw Elijah surrounded by mimics, at least 20 of them, including Not David and Not Mills. They formed a circle around him but didn't approach, as if waiting for something. Then the surface of the lake began to change near the shore. A massive shape rose up, the taker in its true form, that twisted branch-like body covered in its sap skin, but much larger now, at least 15 feet tall. Faces swirled beneath its surface, hundreds of them, some so old they were barely recognizable. As human, the creature moved toward Elijah with purpose. As it approached, the old man stood straighter, no longer leaning on his makeshift cane. He began to sing, the same folk song I'd heard him use as a distraction in the tunnel. The sound seemed to confuse the taker, making it pause. This was my chance. I rowed harder, reaching the center of the lake. The canister was simple, a metal container with a twist-off top. My hands shook as I opened it, the sharp chemical smell burning my nostrils. On shore, the taker had reached Elijah. Long, branch-like fingers stretched out, touching the old man's face almost gently. Elijah kept singing, even as the creature's clear skin began to envelop him. I upended the canister, pouring its contents into the lake. The thick green liquid spread across the surface, much faster than it should have, like the lake itself was, pulling it in. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the surface began to bubble where the chemicals touched it. A high, keening wail filled the air, not coming from the taker on shore, but from the lake itself. The entire surface began to roil, and steam. The boat started to sink, the lake's surface becoming less solid beneath it. I dropped the empty canister and grabbed the oars, rowing desperately for shore. On land, the taker jerked back from Elijah, its massive form convulsing. The mimics surrounding them began to twitch and jerk like broken puppets. Some fell to the ground, their bodies breaking apart into what looked like rotted wood and dried sap. The taker turned toward the lake, sensing the threat to its core. It abandoned Elijah, who collapsed to the ground, and charged toward the water's edge. Toward me, my boat was sinking fast, still 20 feet from shore. The oars passed through the dissolving surface without finding purchase. I had no choice. I jumped into the knee-deep water and waded as fast as I could toward land. The liquid burned where it touched my skin, not like fire but like acid, eating away at my clothes, my boots. Each step was agony, but I kept going, focused on the shore just ahead. Behind me, the taker reached the lake and waded in. The effect was immediate. Its form began to dissolve where the poisoned lake touched it. It thrashed wildly, sending waves of burning liquid washing over me. I fell forward, crawling the last few feet to shore. My vision blurred with pain, but I could still see the taker. Its massive form was coming apart, the faces trapped within its skin emerging as it dissolved, hundreds of them breaking free. Like birds from a cage, the mimics in the forest were collapsing too, their bodies reverting to twisted wood and hardened sap. Not David fell just feet from me, his face cracking open to reveal nothing but hollow space inside. The taker gave one final terrible cry, a sound like every voice it had ever stolen crying out at once, then collapsed into the lake. The surface bubbled furiously for several minutes, then gradually went still. Where there had been a perfect circle of water, was now a steaming pit of dissolving organic matter. I dragged myself to where Elijah lay. He was still breathing, barely. "Did we get it?" he whispered. "We got it," I confirmed, my own voice rough with pain. "It's gone," he smiled faintly. "Good." His eyes drifted past me, focusing on something I couldn't see. "They're free now, all of them." His breathing slowed, then stopped. The last person to remember the valley before the taker was gone. I don't remember much after that. The chemicals had soaked into my skin, my lungs. I was dying too, I knew, but I had to get away, had to warn someone in case there were more of these things out there. Somehow I found the strength to walk. For hours, days maybe, I stumbled through the forest. My skin blistered and peeled, my lungs burned with every breath. But I kept going, following the rising sun east toward civilization. Forest rangers found me collapsed on the main road, 15 miles from the lodge. They said I was delirious, ranting about faces in trees and people who weren't people. The doctors at the hospital diagnosed chemical exposure, though they couldn't identify the substance. They gave me weeks to live. That was 6 months ago. The doctors can't explain why I'm still alive, though they point to the strange root-like growths beneath my skin as a concern. Some kind of organic response to the chemical exposure, they say. The growth spread a little more each day. From my hospital window, I can see trees growing at an impossible rate, their branches reaching toward my third-floor room. Sometimes I think I see faces in their bark, watching me. Last week a nurse dropped a mirror. When I helped her pick up the pieces, I swear my reflection moved independently of me just for a second. And sometimes, when I sleep, I dream of a lake, a new lake forming in my chest, clear as glass and filled with tiny faces. The doctors think the growths will reach my brain eventually. They've scheduled surgery, but I won't be here for it. Tonight, when the ward is quiet, I'm going to take the lighter I've hidden in my pillowcase and end this. I won't let myself become a vessel for the taker's rebirth. If you're reading this, it means I succeeded. The thing growing inside me died too. But be careful in the forests. Listen for the sounds that aren't quite right. Watch for people who move too smoothly. And if you find a perfect circular lake in the woods, run. Run and don't look back, because the taker is always hungry, always learning. And somewhere, in some forest, it's waiting for its next victim. Maybe it's waiting for you. The report sits in the manila folder marked Caldwell Lewis deceased in the basement archives of Ozark Valley Memorial Hospital. Cause of death, self-immolation during psychological episode related to chemical exposure and PTSD. On the last page is a note from the attending physician. Patient demonstrated unusual biological anomalies prior to death, root-like structures beneath the epidermis that continued to show signs of growth post-mortem. Tissue samples sent to CDC for analysis were lost in transit. Recommend investigation of former residents for environmental contaminants. A second note, added later in different handwriting, investigation of Caldwell property revealed total environmental dead zone extending 1 mile in all directions from residence. Area quarantined, pending further study. A third note, dated 6 months later, quarantine lifted. Dead zone has transformed into area of unprecedented biological growth. New plant species documented with unusual characteristics. Request for extended research denied. Property sold to private buyer. The final page contains a satellite image of the valley. From above, the new forest growth forms a pattern that, if one looks closely, resembles a human face. According to more recent images, the features seem to change slightly each year. The property records show the new owners of the hunting lodge are a young couple from the city looking for a quiet place to raise their children. The husband reportedly comments often on the unusual silence of the forest and how friendly their new neighbor is. An older man who looks remarkably like the previous owner. He has the kindest smile.